Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream of the Jane Eyre Readathon. We are about to begin chapters 11 through 15, which is part 3 of our segments. There are going to be 9 total. This is the last one today. The other 6 will be streaming tomorrow at 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 4 o'clock New York time, and then at 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock London time. Don't know why I say and then, because those are actually the same times, just different time zones, and it will be the same times on Sunday. If you want to catch up with the first 2 segments or with any of the segments, you can do that after any of the readathons are complete, because they will be available on our YouTube channel for you to watch at your convenience. The purpose of our Jane Eyre Readathon is to raise funds and also to raise awareness to help save the Honresfield Library. This is something that has been in the news recently. It was set to be a public auction at Sotheby's of all kinds of literary manuscripts and treasures from the 19th century. These included many of the Bronte's manuscripts and books from their own personal collection. The problem with the public auction is that museums in a post-pandemic time don't have the money to compete with private wealthy individuals in an auction. The good news is that the auction has been put on hold for to give a coalition of libraries and museums a chance to purchase the library outright for £15 million. So we are here to try to help gather that £15 million for the Friends of the National Libraries. If you would like to donate, there is a link currently available on our welcome video on YouTube. There are actually 2 links, one that goes directly to the Friends of the National Libraries. If you are a UK resident, it is probably better for you tax-wise to donate there. There is also a link to our GoFundMe page, which will ultimately end up going to the Friends of the National Libraries as well. That one is in dollars, so if you are in America or elsewhere in the world, you can change the currency on that donation so you don't get charged a currency conversion fee by your credit card. These links will be available on this video too. I just have to go back and edit it after the fact. So if you desperately want to share funds with us now, go to the links in the welcome video and click on one of those. You can also follow us on Twitter. We are at Bring Bronte's Home, H-O-M, not an E. And you can follow us for updates there as well. We're going to be holding an auction in July, from July 3rd to July 10th, of different donated bookish items, signed editions from authors, editing services, and such. And we will post links on our Twitter for that as well. If you're interested in donating, there is currently a form on our pinned tweet that you can fill out to donate an item or a service to our auction. And we're very grateful for everyone who is watching, everyone who's spreading the word. If you can't donate financially, we ask that you share your voice with us and post our videos and our channel on your social media. Call your friends, call your family. Have them relive or live for the first time the experiences of Jane on her adventures in this fantastic novel. I would like to give all of our readers in this segment a chance to introduce themselves. So I'll call on you and then please just share a little bit about yourself. Barbara, could you please go first?
Thank you, Amber. My name is Barbara Quick. I'm a novelist and I love the Bronte sisters, and they have inspired me throughout my life from the time when I was a teenager. They continue to inspire me. And lately I watched a documentary, a wonderful documentary about the Brontes that made me feel the importance of restoring their home as much as possible. And when I was given this opportunity to be a reader, I thought, well, how wonderful. And also I'm an old thespian. So even though it's rather absurd, I'll be playing a 10-year-old girl as well as a servant. That's less unbelievable. I will do my best and try to channel all my old theater training. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us. Christina, could you please go next?
Hi, I'm Christina Britton Conroy. I am also an author. I write historical fiction, among other things. And I'm also a certified music therapist, and I was a musical theater performer in my first life.
Wonderful, thank you. Carolyn, can you please go next?
Yes, I am Carolyn Burns-Bass. I am a writer as well. This is a biography for middle grade readers, introducing children to the Bronte sisters.
Wow.
It was published in December of last year by Blue River Press, and it's available in bookstores all over America and in your favorite online stores. I have also been a lifelong Bronte fan, and I was just excited to be a part of this project. And I've been to Haworth, I've been to the Parsonage Museum, and it's so worth whatever we can do to help be a part of that.
Thank you so much. And that sounds like a great book, because we were talking in our earlier sessions that a lot of us started reading this around the age of 11 or 12. So that would be a great introduction to Jane Eyre or whatever Bronte novel kids want to read. Thanks. Emilio, AKA Carman, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Emilio Vieira. I'm a professional actor based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I'm super humbled to be in the Zoom room with such an accomplished and brilliant group. This is the first time I've ever read Jane Eyre. I've actually not completed the novel. So I don't know what happens. I don't know the characters. And yet this year I collaborated with a wonderful artist friend of mine on writing a film about dating from 6 feet apart. And we often spoke about this sort of courtship at a distance that is very timely for these 19th century works. So if you're interested in checking out that film, it will be available next week at our website, www.februarytheplay.com.
Thank you. And I saw the play already and it was very good. So I recommend it. Thank you. And I love that we have presumably viewers as well who have no idea what's going to happen. And that's why a lot of our motto is going to be no spoilers. We did already see a death, a heartbreaking death in our last segment. And I don't even think I want to talk about that right now in case someone is just tuning in and is going to catch up on what happens in the first 2 segments at a later time. So next, and well, I should say last but not least, we have Katrina.
Oh, thank you. My name is Katrina Michaels. I'm a professional actor based in New York City, although I am originally from England, hence this thing that comes out of my mouth. And I have a great love for the Brontes. I was very lucky to have done 2 productions that took their words from poems and diary entries and letters and their novels and wove them together to tell the stories of their lives. One on all 3 sisters, and then actually right before the pandemic, in honor of Anne's bicentennial, I did a production produced by the Bronte Society and the New York Public Library that centered the story of Anne Bronte. So it's wonderful to celebrate my sister and do some Charlotte Bronte Jane Eyre today.
That's fantastic, thank you. And I am Team Anne, very unashamedly Team Anne. I'm teaching the tenet of Wildfell Hall right now. I'm Amber Elby. I am your host once again. This is the 3rd time you may have heard me say that. I am based in Austin, Texas as an author and a professor, and I am going to be the swing during this segment, which means that if a reader has to leave or is otherwise inaccessible to continue reading, then I'm going to jump in. But otherwise, you will not be seeing me until the end. I will be sitting here. I still have my box of Kleenex from the last segment, which I really needed. I'll be sitting here the whole time. So readers, if you have an emergency, just put it in the chat of our Zoom and I will see it and jump in to help you. But audiences, we are ready to start. Thank you, readers, in advance. I'll thank you again at the end too. This is going to, knock on wood, go so smoothly, and I'm really looking forward to it. We are going to begin chapter 11. So Jane, take it away.
A new chapter in a novel is something like a new scene in a play. And when I draw the curtain up this time, Rita, you must fancy you see a room in the George Inn at Millcote with such a large figured papering on the walls as inn rooms have, such a carpet, such furniture, such ornaments on the mantelpiece, such prints, including a portrait of George III and another of the Prince of Wales, and a representation of the death of Wolfe. All this is visible to you by the light of an oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, and by that of an excellent fire near which I sit in my cloak and bonnet. My muffin umbrella lie on a table, and I am warming away the numbness and chill contracted by 16 hours exposure to the rawness of an October day. I left Lowton at 4 o'clock a.m., and the Millcote town clock is now just striking 8. Reader, although I look comfortably accommodated, I am not very tranquil in mind. I thought when the coach stopped here, there would be someone to meet me. I looked anxiously around as I descended the wooden steps, the boots placed for my convenience, expecting to hear my name pronounced and to see some description of carriage waiting to convey me to Thornfield. Nothing of this sort was visible. And when I asked a waiter if anyone had been to inquire after a Miss Eyre, I was answered in the negative. So I had no resource but to request to be shown into a private room, and here I am waiting while all sorts of doubts and fears are troubling my thoughts. It is a very strange sensation to inexperienced youth to feel itself quite alone in the world, cut adrift from every connection, uncertain whether the port to which it is bound can be reached, and prevented of many impediments from returning to that it has quitted. The charm of adventure sweetens that sensation, that the glow of pride warms it, but then the throb of fear disrupts it. And fear with me became prominent when half an hour elapsed and still I was alone. I bethought myself to ring the bell.
Is there a place in this neighborhood called Thornfield?
I asked of a waiter who answered the summons. Do we have a waiter?
So I should have said this was probably me messing up with the, and this is my disclaimer that should have been at the beginning. Sometimes I do mess up with the highlights, in which case I will jump in. Thornfield, I don't know, ma'am. I'll inquire at the bar.
Vanished and reappeared instantly.
Is your name Ea, miss?
Yes.
Person here waiting for you.
Oh, I jumped up and took my muffin umbrella and hastened into the inn passage. A man was standing by the open door in the lamp-lit street, and I dimly saw a one-horse conveyance.
This will be your luggage, I suppose?
And the man rather abruptly, when he saw me, pointing at my trunk in the passage.
Yes.
He hoisted it onto the vehicle, which was a sort of car, and then I got in. Before he shut me up, I asked how far it was to Thornfield.
A matter of 6 miles.
How long shall it be before we get there?
Up in an hour and a half.
He fastened the car door, climbed into his own seat outside, and we set off. Our progress was leisurely, and it gave me ample time to reflect. I was content to be at length so near the end of my journey. And as I leaned back in the comfortable, though not elegant, conveyance, I meditated much at my ease.
I suppose,
I thought,
judging from the plainness of the servant and carriage, Mrs. Fairfax is not a very dashing person. So much the better. I never lived amongst fine people but once, and I was very miserable with them. I wonder if she lives alone except this little girl. If so, and if she is in any degree amiable, I shall surely be able to get on with her. I will do my best. It is a pity that doing one's best does not always answer. At Lowood, indeed, I took that resolution, kept it, and succeeded in pleasing. But with Mrs. Reed, I remember my best was always spurned with scorn. I pray God, Mrs. Fairfax may not turn out a second Mrs. Reed. But if she does, I'm not bound to stay with her. Let the worst come to the worst. I can advertise again. How far are we on our road now, I wonder?
I let down the window and looked out. Millcote was behind us, judging by a number of its lights. It seemed a place of considerable magnitude, much larger than Loughton. We were now, as far as I could see, on a sort of common, but there were houses scattered all over the district. I felt we were in a different region to Lowood, more populous, less picturesque, more stirring, less romantic. The roads were heavy, the night misty. My conductor let his horse walk all the way, and the hour and a half extended, I verily believe, to 2 hours. At last he turned in his seat and said,
"You're none so far from Thornfield now."
Again I looked out. We were passing a church. I saw its low, broad tower against the sky, and its bell was tolling a quarter. I saw a narrow galaxy of lights, too, on a hillside, marking a village or hamlet. About 10 minutes after, the driver got down and opened a pair of gates. We passed through, and they clashed to behind us. We now slowly ascended a drive and came upon a long front of a house. Candlelight gleamed from one curtained bow window. All the rest were dark. The car stopped at the front door. It was opened by a maidservant. I alighted and went in.
"Will you walk this way, ma'am?"
said the girl, and I followed her across a square hall to high doors all around. She ushered me into a room whose double illumination of fire and candles at first dazzled me, contrasting as it did with the darkness to which my eyes had been for 2 hours inured. When I could see, however, a cozy and agreeable picture presented itself to my view. A snug, small room, a round table by a cheerful fire, an armchair, high-backed and old-fashioned, wherein sat the neatest imaginable little elderly lady in a widow's cap, black silk gown, and snowy muslin apron. Exactly what I fancied Mrs. Fairfax, only less stately and milder looking. She was occupied by knitting. A large cat sat demurely at her feet. Nothing, in short, was wanting to complete the beau ideal of domestic comfort. A more reassuring introduction for a new governess could scarcely be conceived. There was no grandeur to overwhelm, no stateliness to embarrass, and then as I entered, the old lady got up and promptly and kindly came forward to meet me.
How do you do, my dear? I'm afraid you have had a tedious ride. John drives so slowly. You must be cold. Come to the fire.
Mrs. Fairfax, I suppose?
Yes, you are right. Do sit down.
Well, she conducted me to her own chair, then began to remove my shawl and untie my bonnet strings. I begged that she would not give herself so much trouble.
Oh, it is no trouble. I dare say your own hands are almost numbed with cold. Leah, make a little hot negus and cut a sandwich or two. Here are the keys of the storeroom.
And she produced from her pocket the most housewifely bunch of keys and delivered them to the servant.
Now then, draw nearer to the fire. You've brought your luggage with you, haven't you, my dear?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll see it carried to your room.
She bustled out.
She treats me like a visitor.
Why?
I little expected such a reception. Anticipated only coldness and stiffness. This is not like what I have heard of the treatment of governesses, but I must not exult too soon.
She returned, and with her own hands cleared her knitting apparatus and a book or two from the table to make room for the tray which Leah now brought, and then herself handed me the refreshments. I felt rather confused at being the object of more attention than I had ever before received, and that too shown by my employer and superior. But as she did not herself seem to consider she was doing anything out of her place, I thought it better to take her civilities quietly.
Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?
I asked when I had partaken of what she offered me.
What did you say, my dear? I'm a little deaf.
The good lady approached her ear to my mouth. I repeated the question more distinctly.
Miss Fairfax? Oh, you mean Miss Varens. Varens is the name of your future pupil.
Indeed. Then she is not your daughter?
No, I have no family.
Oh, I should have followed up my first inquiry by asking by what way Miss Varens was connected with her, but I recollect that it was not polite to ask too many questions. Besides, I was sure to hear in time.
I'm so glad.
She sat down opposite me and took the cat on her knee.
I'm so glad you are come. It will be quite pleasant living here now with a companion. To be sure, it is pleasant at any time, for Thornfield is a fine old hall, rather neglected of late years, perhaps, but still it is a reputable place. Yet you know, in winter time one feels dreary, quite alone in the best quarters. I say alone. Leah is a nice girl to be sure, and John and his wife are very decent people. But then you see they are only servants, and one can't converse with them on terms of equality. One must keep them at due distance, for fear of losing one's authority. But I'm sure last winter, it was a very severe one, if you recollect, and when it did not snow, it rained and blew. Not a creature but the butcher and postman came to the house from November till February, and I really got quite melancholy with sitting night after night alone. I had Leah in to read to me sometimes, but I don't think the poor girl liked the task much. She felt it confining. In spring and summer, one got on better. Sunshine and long days make such a difference. And then, just at the commencement of this autumn, little Adela Varens comes and her nurse. A child makes a house alive all at once. And now you are here, and I shall be quite gay.
My heart really warmed to the worthy lady as I heard her talk, and I drew my chair a little nearer to her and expressed my sincere wish that she might find my company as agreeable as she anticipated.
But I'll not keep you sitting up late tonight. It is at the stroke of 12 now, and you have been traveling all day. You must feel tired. If you have got your feet well warmed, I'll show you your bedroom. I've had the room next to mine prepared for you. It is only a small apartment, but I thought you would like it better than one of those large front chambers. To be sure, they have finer furniture, but they are so dreary and solitary. I never sleep in them myself.
I thanked her for her considerate choice, and as I really felt fatigued after my long journey, expressed my readiness to retire. She took a candle, and I followed her from the room. First, she went to see if the hall door was fastened. Having taken the keys from the lock, she led the way upstairs. The steps and banisters were of oak. The staircase window was high and latticed. Both it and the long gallery in which the bedroom doors opened looked as if they belonged to a church rather than a house. A very chilly and vault-like air pervaded the stairs and gallery, suggesting cheerless ideas of space and solitude. I was glad when finally ushered into my chamber to find it of small dimensions and furnished in ordinary modern style. When Miss Fairfax had bidden me a kind good night and I had fastened the door, gazed leisurely around, and in some measure effaced an eerie impression made by the wide hall, the dark and spacious staircase, and that long, cold gallery, by the livelier aspect of my little room, I remembered that after a day of bodily fatigue and mental anxiety, I was now at last in safe haven. The impulse of gratitude swelled my heart, and I knelt down at the bedside and offered up thanks where thanks were due, not forgetting, ere I rose, to implore aid on my further path and the power of meriting the kindness which seemed so frankly offered before it was earned. My couch had no thorns in it that night, my solitary room no fears, And once, weary and content, I slept soon and soundly. When I awoke, it was broad day. The chamber looked such a bright little place to me as the sun shone in between gay blue chintz window curtains showing papered walls and a carpeted floor, so unlike the bare planks and stained plaster of lower that my spirits rose at the view. Externals have a great effect on the young. I thought that a fairer era of my life was beginning for me, one that was to have its flowers and pleasures as well as its thorns and toils. My faculties, aroused by the change of scene, a new field offered to hope, seemed all astir. I cannot precisely define what they expected, but it was something pleasant, not perhaps that day or that month, but at an indefinite future period. I rose. I dressed myself with care, obliged to be plain, for I had no article of attire that was not made with extreme simplicity. I was still by nature solicitous to be neat. It was not my habit to be disregardful of appearance or careless of the impression I made. On the contrary, I wished to look as well as I could and to please as many as my want of beauty would permit. I sometimes regretted that I was not handsomer. I sometimes wished to have rosy cheeks, a straight nose, a small cherry mouth. I desired to be tall and stately and finely developed in figure. I felt it was a misfortune that I was so little, so pale. I had features so regular and so marked. And why had I these aspirations and these regrets? I would be difficult to say. I could not then distinctly say it to myself, yet I had a reason and a logical, natural reason too. However, when I had brushed my hair very smooth and put on my black frock, which, Quaker like as it was, at least it had the merit of fitting to a nicety, and adjusted my clean white tucker, I thought I should do respectably enough to appear before Mrs. Fairfax, and that my new pupil would not at least recoil from me in antipathy. Having opened my chamber window and seen that I left all things straight and neat on the toilet table, I ventured forth. Traversing the long and matted gallery, I descended the slippery steps of oak. Then I gained the hall. I halted there a minute. I looked at some pictures on the walls. One I remember represented a grim man in a cuirass, and one a lady with powdered hair and a pearl necklace. At a bronze lamp pendant from the ceiling, at a great clock whose case was oak curiously carved, at an ebon black with time and rubbing. Everything appeared very stately and imposing to me, but then I was so little accustomed to grandeur. The hall door, which was half of glass, stood open. I stepped over the threshold. It was a fine autumn morning. The early sun shone serenely on and browned groves and still green fields advancing onto the lawn. I looked up and surveyed the front of the mansion. There were 3 stories high, of proportions not vast, though considerable, a gentleman's manor house, not a nobleman's seat. Battlements round the top gave it a picturesque look. Its grey front stood out well from the background of a rookery whose cawing tenants were now on the wing. They flew over the lawn and grounds to alight in a great meadow from which these were separated by a sunk fence, and where an array of mighty old thorn trees, strongly knotted and broad as oaks, at once explained the etymology of the mansion's designation. Further off were hills, not so lofty as those around Lowood, nor so craggy, nor so like the barriers of separation from the living world, but yet quiet and lonely hills enough, and seeming to embrace Thornfield with a seclusion I had not expected to find existence so near a stirring locality of Millcott, a little hamlet whose roofs were blent with trees, straggled up the side of one of those hills. The church, the district stood nearer Thornfield, its old tower up looked over a knoll between the house and the gates. I was yet enjoying the calm prospect and pleasant fresh air, yet listening with delight to the cawing of the rooks, yet surveying the wide hoary front of the door, and thinking what a great place it was for one lonely little dam like Mrs. Fairfax to inhabit, when that lady appeared at the door.
What? Out already? I see you are an early riser.
I went up to her and was received with an affable kiss and a shake of the hand.
How do you like Thornfield?
I told her I liked it very much.
Yes, it is a pretty place, but I fear it will be getting out of order unless Mr. Rochester should take it into his head to come and reside here permanently, or at least visit it rather oftener. Great houses and fine grounds require the presence of the proprietor.
Mr. Rochester, who is he?
The owner of Thornfield. Did you not know he was called Rochester?
Well, of course I did not. I had never heard of him before. But the old lady seemed to regard his existence as universally understood facts, of which everybody must be acquainted by instinct.
I thought Thornfield belonged to you.
To me? Bless you, child. What an idea. To me. I am only the housekeeper, the manager. To be sure, I am distinctly related to the Rochesters by my mother's side, or at least my husband was. He was a clergyman, incumbent of Hay, that little village yonder on the hill, and that church near the gates was his. The present Mr. Rochester's mother was a Fairfax, and a second cousin to my husband. But I never presume on the connection. In fact, it is nothing to me. I consider myself quite in the light of an ordinary housekeeper. My employer is always civil, and I expect nothing more.
And the little girl, my pupil.
She is Mr. Rochester's ward. He commissioned me to find a governess for her. He intended to have her brought up in Shire. I believe she comes with her bonne, as she calls her nurse.
The enigma then explained. This affable and kind little widow was no great dame, but a dependent like myself. I did not like her the worse for that. On the contrary, I felt better pleased than ever. The equality between her and me was real, not the mere result of condescension on her part. Oh, so much the better. My position was all the freer. And as I meditated on this discovery, a little girl, followed by her attendant, came running up the lawn. I looked at my pupil, who did not at first appear to notice me. She was quite a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, slightly built, with a pale, small-featured face and a redundancy of hair falling in curls to her waist.
Good morning, Miss Adela. Come and speak to the lady who is to teach you, and to make you a clever woman some day.
She approached.
C'est là ma gouvernante.
And she said, pointing to me and addressing her nurse, who answered,
Mais oui, certainement.
Are they foreigners?
I inquired, amazed at hearing the French language.
The nurse is a foreigner, and Adela was born on the continent, and I believe never till within 6 months ago. When she first came here, she could speak no English. Now she can make shift to talk a little. I don't understand her. She mixes it so with French, but you will make out her meaning very well, I dare say.
Well, fortunately, I had had the advantage of being taught French by a French lady, and as I had made it a point of conversing with Madame Parot as often as I could, I had besides, during the last 7 years, learned a portion of French by heart daily, applying myself to take pains with my accent and imitating as closely as possible the pronunciation of my teacher. I had acquired a certain degree of readiness and correctness in language, and was not likely to be much at a loss with Mademoiselle Adela. She came and shook hands with me, and when she heard that I was her governess, and as I led her into breakfast, she addressed some phrases to her in her own tongue. She replied briefly at first, but afterwards we seated at the table, and she examined me some 10 minutes with her large hazel eyes, and suddenly commenced chattering fluently.
Ah,
She cried in French.
You speak my language as well as Mr. Rochester does. I can talk to you as I can talk to him, and so can Sophie. Oh, she would be glad. Nobody here understands her. Madame Fairfax is all English. Sophie is my nurse. She came with me over the sea in a great ship with a chimney that smoked. How it did smoke! And I was sick, and so was Sophie, and so was Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester lay down on a sofa in a pretty room called the salon, and Sophie and I had little beds in another place. I nearly fell out of mine. It was like a shelf. And Mademoiselle, what is your name?
Eyre, Jane Eyre.
Eyre? Poof! I cannot say it. Well, our ship stopped in the morning before it was quite daylight at a great city, a huge city with very dark houses and all smoky, not at all like the pretty clean town I came from. And Mr. Rochester carried me in his arms over a plank to the land, and Sophie came after, and we all got into a coach which took us to a beautiful large house, larger than this and finer, called an hotel. We stayed there nearly a week. I and Sophie used to walk every day in a great green place full of trees called the park. And there were many children there besides me, and a pond with beautiful birds in it that I fed with crumbs.
Can you understand her when she runs on so fast?
Oh, I understood her very well, for I had been accustomed to the fluent tongue of Madame Pierrot.
I wish. Would you ask her a question or two about her parents? I wonder if she remembers them.
Adele, with whom did you live with when you were in that pretty clean town you spoke of?
I lived long ago with Mamma, but she is gone to the Holy Virgin. Mamma used to teach me to dance and sing and to say verses. A great many gentlemen and ladies came to see Mamma, and I used to dance before them or to sit on their knees and sing to them. I liked it. Shall I let you hear me sing now?
Breakfast, so I permitted to her to give me a specimen of her accomplishments. Descending from her chair, she came and placed herself on my knee. Then, folding her little hands demurely before her, shaking back her curls and lifting her eyes to the ceiling, she commenced singing a song from some opera. It was a strain of a forsaken lady who, after bewailing the perfidy of her lover, calls pride to her aid, desires her attendant to deck her in her brightest jewels and richest robes, and resolved to meet the false one that night at a ball, and prove to him by the gaiety of her demeanor how little his desertion has affected her. The subject seemed strangely chosen for an infant singer, but I suppose the point of the exhibition lay in the hearing of the notes and love of jealousy warbled from the lisp of childhood in a very bad taste, a point that was, at least I thought so. Adele sang and canonized truthfully enough, and with the naivete of her age, this achieved, she jumped from my knee and said,
Now, mademoiselle, I will repeat you some poetry.
Assuming an attitude, she began,
La Ligue des Rats, Fable de La Fontaine.
Then she declaimed a little piece with an attention to punctuation and emphasis, a flexibility of the voice, and an appropriateness of gesture very unusual indeed at her age, and which proved she had been carefully trained.
Was it your mamma who taught you that piece?
Yes, and she used to say it in this way. Qu'avez-vous donc, lui dit un de ces rats, parlez. She made me lift my hand so to remind me to raise my voice at the question. Now, shall I dance for you?
No, that will do. But after your mamma went to the Holy Virgin, as you say, with whom did you live then?
With Madame Frédéric and her husband. She took care of me, but she has nothing related to me. I think she is poor, for she had not so fine a house as mamma. I was not long there. Mr. Rochester asked me if I would like to go and live with him in England, and I said yes, for I knew Mr. Rochester before I knew Madame Frederic, and he was always kind to me and gave me pretty dresses and toys. But you see, he has not kept his word, for he has brought me to England, and now he has gone back again himself, and I never see him.
After breakfast, Adele and I withdrew to the library, which room it appears Mr. Rochester has directed that be used as a schoolroom. Most of the books were locked up behind glass doors, but there was one bookcase left open containing everything that could be needed in the way of elementary works and several volumes of light literature, poetry, biography, travels, and a few romances, etc. I suppose he had considered that these were all a governess would require for her private perusal, and indeed they contented me amply for the present, compared with the scanty pickings that were now and then able to glean at Lowood. They seemed to offer an abundant harvest of entertainment and information. This room, too, was a cabinet piano, quite new and of superior tone, also an easel for painting and a pair of globes. I found my pupil sufficiently docile, though disinclined to apply. She had not been used to regular occupation of any kind. I felt it would be injudicious to confine her too much at first, so when I had talked to her a great deal and got to learn a little, and when the morning had advanced to noon, I allowed her to return to the nurse. I had then proposed to occupy myself till dinner time in drawing some little sketches for her use. As I was going upstairs to fetch my portfolio and pencils, Mrs. Fairfax called to me. "Your morning school hours are over now, I suppose," she said, as she was in the room of folding chairs, which stood open. I went in when she addressed me. It was a large, stately apartment with purple chairs and curtains, a turkey carpet, walnut paneled walls, one vast window rich with stained glass, and a lofty ceiling nobly molded. Mrs. Fairfax was dusting some vases of fine purple spar which stood on the sideboard.
What a beautiful room!
Exclaimed as I looked around, for I had never seen anything half so imposing.
Yes, this is the dining room. I've just opened the window to let in a little air and sunshine, for everything gets so damp in apartments that are seldom inhabited. And the drawing room yonder feels like a vault.
He pointed to a wide arch corresponding to the window and hung like it with the tear-and-dyed curtains now looped up, morning to it by two broad steps, and looking through, I thought I caught a glimpse of a fairy place. So bright to my novice eyes appeared the view beyond. Yet it was merely a very pretty drawing room, and within it a boudoir, both spread with white carpets on which seemed laid brilliant garlands of flowers, both sealed and with snowy moldings of white grapes and vine leaves, beneath which glowed in rich contrast crimson couches and ottomans, while the ornaments on a pale Purian mantelpiece were sparkling Bohemian glass, ruby red, and between the windows large mirrors repeated the general blending of snow and fire.
In what order you keep these rooms, Mrs. Fairfax? No dust, no canvas coverings, except that the air feels chilly. One would think they were inhabited daily.
Why, Miss Eyre, though Mr. Rochester's visits here are rare, they are always sudden and unexpected. And as I observed that it put him out to find everything swathed up and to have a bustle of arrangement on his arrival, I thought it best to keep the rooms in readiness.
Is Mr. Rochester an exacting, fastidious sort of man?
Not particularly so, but he has a gentleman's tastes and habits, and he expects to have things managed in conformity to them.
Do you like him? Is he generally liked?
Oh, yes, the family have always been respected here. Almost all the land in this neighborhood, as far as you can see, has belonged to the Rochesters, time out of mind.
Well, but leaving his land out of question, do you like him? Is he liked for himself?
I have no cause to do otherwise than like him, and I believe he is considered a just and liberal landlord by his tenants, but he has never lived much among them.
But has he no peculiarities? What, in short, is his character?
Oh, his character is impeachable, I suppose. He is rather peculiar, perhaps. He has traveled a great deal and seen a great deal of the world, I should think. I dare say he is clever, but I never had much conversation with him.
In what way is he peculiar?
I don't know. It is not easy to describe. Nothing striking, but you feel it when he speaks to you. You cannot always be sure whether he is in jest or earnest, whether he is pleased or the contrary. You don't thoroughly understand him. In short, at least, I don't. But it is no consequence. He is a very good master.
This was all the account I got from Mrs. Fairfax of her employer and mine. There are people that seem to have no notion of sketching a character or observing and describing salient points, either in persons or things. The good lady evidently belonged to this class. My queries puzzled, but did not draw her out. Mr. Rochester was Mr. Rochester in her eyes, a gentleman, a landed proprietor, and nothing more. She inquired and searched no further, and evidently wondered at my wish to gain more definite notion of his identity. When we left the dining room, she proposed to show me over the rest of the house, and I followed her upstairs and downstairs, admiring as I went, for all was well arranged and handsome. The large front chambers I thought especially grand, and some of the third-story rooms, though dark and low, were interesting from their air of antiquity. The furniture, once appropriated to the lower apartments, had from time to time been removed here as fashions changed, and the imperfect light entering by the narrow casement showed bedsteads of 100 years old, the chests of oak or walnut looking with their strange carvings of palm branches and cherubs' heads, like the types of the Hebrew ark. Rows of venerable chairs, high-backed and narrow, stood still more antiquated on those cushioned tops, and yet apparent traces of half-effaced embroideries wrought by fingers that for 2 generations had been coffin dust. All these relics gave it to the third story of Thornfield House the aspect of a home of the past, a shrine of memory. I liked the hush, the gloom, the quaintness of these retreats in the day, but I by no means coveted the night's repose on any of those wide and heavy beds, shut in, some of them with doors of oak, shaded others in wrought of old English hangings crusted with thick wood work, portraying effigies of strange flowers and strange birds and strangest human beings, all of which would have looked strange indeed in the pallid gleam of moonlight.
Do the servants sleep in these rooms?
No, they occupy a range of smaller apartments in the back. No one ever sleeps here. One would almost say that if there were a ghost at Thornfield Hall, this would be its haunt.
So I think you have no ghosts then?
None that I've ever heard of.
Returned Miss Fairfax, smiling.
Nor any traditions of one? No legends or ghost stories?
I believe not. And yet it is said the Rochesters have been rather a violent than a quiet race in their time. Perhaps, though, that is the reason they rest tranquilly in their graves now.
Yes. After life's fitful fever, they sleep well. Where are you going now, Mrs. Fairfax?
On to the Leads. Will you come and see the view from there?
I followed still up a very narrow staircase to the attic, and thence by a ladder and through a trap door to the roof of the hall. I was now on a level with the crow colony. I could see into their nests. Leaning over the battlements and looking far down, I surveyed the grounds laid out like a map. The bright and velvet lawn closely girdling the grey base of the mansion, field wide as a park, dotted with its ancient timber, the wood, dun and sere, divided up a path visibly overgrown, greener with moss than the trees were with foliage, and the church and the gates, the road, the tranquil hills, all reposing in the autumn day's sun, the horizon bounded by a perpetuous sky in azure marbled with pearly white. No feature in the sky was extraordinary, but all was pleasing. When I turned from it and repassed the trapdoor, I could scarcely see my way down the ladder. The attic seemed black as a vault compared to the arch of blue air to which I had been looking up, so that the sunlit scene of grove and pasture and green hill, of which the hall was a center and over which I had been gazing with delight. Mrs. Fairfax stayed behind a moment to fasten up the trapdoor. I, by dint of groping, found the outlet from the attic and proceeded to descend the narrow garret staircase. I lingered in a long passage to which this led, separating the front and back rooms of the third story, narrow, low, and dim, with only one little window at the far end, and looking with its 2 rows of small black doors, all shut like a corridor in some Bluebeard's castle. While I paced softly on, the last sound I expected to hear in so still a region, a laugh, struck my ear. It was a curious laugh, distinct, formal, mirthless. I stopped. The sound ceased, only for an instant. It began again, louder. For a first, though distant, it was very low. It passed off in a clamorous peal that seemed to wake an echo in every lonely chamber, though it originated but in one, and I could have pointed out the door whence the accent issued.
Mrs. Fairfax?
I called out, for now I heard her descending the great stairs.
Did you hear that loud laugh? Who is it?
Some of the servants, very likely. Perhaps Grace Poole.
Did you hear it?
Yes, plainly. I often hear her. She sews in one of these rooms. Sometimes Leah is with her. They are frequently noisy together.
The laugh was repeated in its low, sibilant tones and terminated in an odd murmur.
Grace?
I really did not expect any Grace to answer, for the laugh was as tragic and perinatal a laugh as any I ever heard, but that it was high noon with no circumstance of ghost lines accompanied a curious intonation, but that neither seen nor season favored fear, I should have been superstitiously afraid. However, the event shipped. I have everything turned off. I'm so sorry. Okay. The door nearest me opened and a servant came out, a woman between 30 and 40, a set, square-made figure, red-haired, and with a hard, plain face. Any apparition less romantic and less ghostly could scarcely be conceived.
Too much noise, Grace. Remember directions. Grace curtsied silently and went in. She is a person we have to sew and assist Leah in her housemaid's work. Not altogether unobjectionable in some points, but she does well enough. By the by, how have you got on with your new pupil this morning?
The conversation thus turned on Adelaide, continued until we reached the light, cheerful region beyond. Adelaide came running to meet us in the hall, exclaiming,
Mesdames, vous êtes servies. J'ai bien faim, moi.
We found dinner ready, waiting for us in Mrs. Fairfax's room. Promise of a smooth career, which my first production at Thornfield Hall seemed to pledge, was not belied in longer acquaintance with the place and its inmates. Mrs. Fairfax turned out to be what she appeared, a placid-tempered, kind-natured woman of competent education and average intelligence. My pupil was I can't talk. I can't talk, sweetheart. Okay. 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 My pupil was a lively child who had been spoilt and indulgent and therefore was sometimes wayward, but she was committed entirely to my care, and no injurious inference from any quarter ever thwarted my plans for her improvement. She soon forgot her little freaks and became obedient and teachable. She had no great talents, no marked traits of character, no particular development of feeling or taste, which raised her 1 inch above the ordinary level of childhood, but neither had she any deficiency or vice which sunk her below it. She made reasonable progress, entertaining for me a vivacious, though perhaps not very profound affection, and by her simplicity, gay prattle, and efforts to please, inspired me in return with a degree of attachment sufficient to make us both content in each other's society. This par parentesa would be thought cool language by persons who entertain solemn doctrines about the angelic nature of children and the duty of those charged with their education could conceive for them the idolatrous devotion, but I am not writing to flatter parental egotism, to echo cant or pomp from humbug. I am merely telling the truth. I felt a conscious solicitude for Adelaide's welfare and progress, and a quite liking for her little self, just as I cherished towards Mrs. Fairfax a thankfulness for her kindness and a pleasure in her society proportionate to the tranquil regard she had for me and the moderation of her character. Anyone may blame me who likes when I add further that now and then I took a walk by myself in the grounds. When I went down the gates and looked through them among the roads, or when, while Adelaide played with her nurse and Mrs. Fairfax made jellies in the storeroom, I climbed the 3 staircases, raised the trap door of the attic, and having reached the leads, looked out afar over the sequestered field and hill along the dim skyline, that I longed for power and vision that might overpass that limit, which might reach the busy world, towns, regions full of life I had heard of but never seen. And then I desired a more practical experience, and I possessed more of intercourse with my kind, of acquaintance with a variety of characters that was here within my reach. I valued what was good in Mrs. Fairfax and what was good in Adela, and I believed the existence of other more vivid kinds of goodness than I believed in I wished to behold. Well, who blames me? Many, no doubt, and I shall be called discontented. I could not help it. The restlessness was in my nature. It was in the silence and solitude of the spot that allowed my mind and eyes to dwell in whatever bright visions rose before it. And certainly there were many and glowing to let my heart be heaved in exalted movement, which, while it swelled and the trouble expanded with life, and best of all, to open my inward ear to a tale that was never ended, a tale my imagination created and narrated continuously, quickened with all the instant life, fire, feeling, and desire that I had not yet actual existence. It is in vain to say that human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility. They must have action, and they will make it if they cannot find it. Millions are condemned to a stiller doom than mine, and millions will be silent revolt against their lot. Nobody knows how many rebellions besides political rebellions ferment in the masses of life which people earth. Women are supposed to be very kind, calm generally, but women feel just as men feel. They need exercise for their faculties in the field of their efforts as much as their brothers do. They suffer from too rigid restraints, too absolute stagnation, precisely as men would suffer, and it is narrow-minded to their more privileged fellow creatures to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings and playing on the piano and embroidering bags, and the thoughtlessness to condemn them or laugh at them if they seek to do more and learn more than is customary to pronounce necessity for their sex. When thus alone, I not infrequently heard Grace Poole's laugh, the same peal, the same low, slow, oh, oh, which in turn was first hard, then thrilled me. I heard her eccentric murmurs stranger than her laugh. There were days when she was quite silent, and there were others when I could not account for the sounds she made. Sometimes I saw her. She would come out of the room with a basin or a pail or a tray in hand, go down to the kitchen, and shortly return, generally a romantic reader. Forgive me for telling you the plain truth, bearing a pot to the porter. Her appearance often acted as a damper to the curiosity raised by her oral oddities. Hard features and staid, she had no point of which interest could attach. I made some few attempts to draw her into conversation, but she seemed a person of few words, and monosyllabic replies usually cut short every effort of that sort. The other members of the household, viz., John and his wife, Leah the housemaid, and Sophie, the French nurse, were decent people, but in no respect remarkable. If Sophie and I used to talk French, and sometimes I asked her questions about her native country, but she was not of a descriptive or narrative turn and generally gave such vapid, confused answers as were calculated rather to check than encourage inquiry. October, November, December passed away. One afternoon in January, Mrs. Fairfax had begged a holiday for Adelaide because she had a cold, and as Miss Adelaide seconded the request with an ardor that reminded me how precious occasional holidays had been to me in my own childhood, I accorded it, deeming that it were well in showing a pliability on the point. It was a fine, calm day, though very cold, and I was tried of stirring still in the library through the whole long morning. Mrs. Fairfax had written a letter which was waiting to be posted, so I put on my bonnet and cloak and volunteered to carry it to Hay. Distance 2 miles would be a pleasant winter afternoon walk. Having seen Adelaide in her little chair by Mrs. Fairfax's parlor fireside and given her her best wax, which I usually kept enveloped in silver paper in a drawer to play with, and a storybook for change of amusement, and replied to her with,
Revenez bientôt, ma bonne amie, ma chère Mademoiselle Jeannette.
with a kiss, I set out. The ground was hard. The air was still. My road was lonely. I walked fast till I got warm, and then I walked slowly to enjoy and analyze the species and pleasure brooding for me at the hour and situation. It was 3 o'clock. The church bell tolled as I passed under the belfry. The charm of that hour and its approaching dimness with a low gliding and pale gleaming sun. I was a mile from Thornfield in a lane noted for wild roses in summer, for nuts and blackberries in autumn, and even now possessing a few coral treasures in hips and halls, and those best winter delights lay in its utter solitude and leafless repose. If the breath of air stirred, it made no sound here, for there was not a holly, not an evergreen to rustle, and stripped hawthorn of hazel bushes were as still as the white worn stones which causewayed in the middle of the path. Far and wide, on each side there were only fields which no cattle now browsed, and little brown birds which stirred occasionally on the hedge looked like single russet leaves that had forgotten to drop. This lane inclined uphill all the way to Hay. Having reached the middle, I sat down in a stile which led hence to the field. Gathering my mantle about me and sheltering my hands in my muff, I did not feel the cold, though it froze keenly, and as was arrested by a sheet of ice covering the causeway where a little brooklet, now congealed, had overflowed after the rapid thaw some days since. From my seat I could look down on Thornfield, the grey, the battlement hall, the principal object in the vale below me, its woods, the dark rookery against the west. I lingered till the sun went down amongst the trees and sank crimson into the air behind them. I then turned eastward. On the hilltop above me sat the rising moon, pale yet as a cloud, but brightening momentarily. She looked over Hay, which, half lost in trees, sent up a blue smoke from its few chimneys. It was yet as a mile distant, and in the absolute hush I could hear plainly its thin murmurs of life. My ear too felt a flow of currents, in what dales of depths I could not tell, but there were many hills beyond Hay, and doubtless many becks threatening their passes. That evening calm betrayed alike the tinkle of nearest streams and sought the most remote. A rude noise broke from these fine ripplings and whisperings at once so far away, so clear, a positive tramp, tramp, tramp of metallic clatter that they efface the soft wave wanderings as in the picture the solid mass of crag or rough boles of great oak drawn with the dark and strong as foreground efface the aerial distance of azure hill, sunny horizon and blended clouds that were tinted melts into tint. The din was yet on a causeway. The horse was coming. The windings of the lane yet hid, but it approached. I was leaving the stile, yet as the path was narrow, I sat still to let it go by. In those days I was young, and all sorts of fancies, bright and dark, tempted my mind. The memories of nursery stories were there amongst the rubbish, and when they occurred, maturing youth added to them as vigor and vividness beyond the childhood could give. This horse approached, and as I watched it to appear through the dusk, I remembered a certain Bessie's tale, wherein figured the North of England spirit called Gaintrash, which from the form of a horse, mule, or a large dog, haunted solitary ways, and sometimes came upon belated travelers, as this horse was now coming upon me. It was very near, but not yet in sight, when, in addition to the tramp, I heard the rush of a hedge. The close down by the hazel stems gilded a large dog in black and white color made them at a distance object against the trees. It was exactly one form, Bessie Ganache, a lion-like creature with long hair and huge head. It passed me, however, quietly enough, and not stayed to look up, and with a strange Peter Canine eyes in the face, and half expected it would, the horse followed. A tall steed, and on its back a rider. The man, a human being, broke the spell at once. Nothing ever rode to trash, and it was always alone, the goblins to my notions, though in mighty tenant dumb and carcasses the beast could scarce coverlet the shelter in commonplace human form. No, Gaintash, this was this only traveller taking a shortcut to Millcote. He passed, and I went on a few steps, and I turned. A sliding sound as I exclamation of what the deuce is to do now, and a clattering tumble attested my attention. Man and horse were down and slipped on a sheet of ice which gazed the causeway. The dog came bounding back, and seeing his master in a predicament and hearing the horse groan, barked till even the hills echoed with the sound, and was deep proportioned to his magnitude. He snuffled around, and the prostrate group that then ran up to me, it was all I could do. There was no other help at hand to summon. I obeyed him and walked down to the traveler, by this time struggling to free himself and his steed. His efforts were so vigorous, I thought he could not be much hurt, but I asked him the question.
Are you injured, sir?
I think it was his swearing, but I'm not certain. However, he was pronouncing some formula that prevented him from replying to me directly.
Can I do anything?
You must just stand on one side.
He answered as he rose first to his knees, then to his feet. I did, whereupon a heaving, stamping, clattering process accompanied by barking and baying, which removed me effectively some yards distance, but I would not be driven quite away till I saw the event. This was finally fortunate. The horse was reestablished. The dog was silenced with a
Down, pilot.
The traveler now stooping felt his foot and leg, and as he was trying with it to whether they were sound, apparently something ailed him, for he halted to the stile and had just risen and sat down. I was in a mood for being useful, or at least officious, I think, for now I drew near him again.
If you are hurt and want help, sir, I can fetch someone from either Thornfield Hall or from Hay.
Thank you. I shall do. I have no broken bones, only a sprain.
And again he stood up and tried the foot, but the result extorted an involuntary something of daylight still lingered, and the moon was waxing bright. I could see him plainly. His figure was enveloped in a riding cloak, fur-collared and steel-clasped. Its details were not apparent, but I traced the general points of middle height and considerable breadth of chest. He had a dark face with stern features and a heavy brow. His gathered eyebrows looked earful and thwarted just now. He was past youth, but had not yet reached middle age. Perhaps he might be 35. I felt no fear of him, and yet a little shyness. Had he been handsome, heroic-looking young gentleman, I should not have dared to stand thus questioning him against the wall and offering my services unmasked. I had hardly ever seen a handsome youth, never in my life spoken to one. I had theoretical reverence of homage for beauty, elegance, gallantry, fascination, but I had met those qualities incarnate in masculine shape. I should have known instinctively that they were neither, nor could not have sympathy with anyone in me, and should have shunned them as one would fire, lighting, or anything else that is bright but antipathetic. If even this stranger had smiled in good nature to me when I addressed him, he would have put off my offer of assistance gaily and with thanks. I should have got on my way and not felt my vocation to renew queries. But the form, the roughness of the traveler set me at ease. I retrained my situation when he waved to me to go and announced,
I cannot think of leaving you, sir, at so late an hour, in this solitary lane, till I see you are fit to mount your horse.
he looked at me when I said this. He had hardly turned his eyes in my direction before.
I should think you ought to. I should think you ought to be at home yourself. If you have a home in this neighborhood, where do you come from?
From just below, and I am not at all afraid of being out late when it is moonlight. I will run over to Hay for you with pleasure, if you wish. Indeed, I am going there to post a letter.
You live just below. Do you mean at that house with the battlements?
Pointed to Thornbird Hall, on which the moon cast a hoary gleam, bringing out the distance and pale of the woods that, by contrast to the western sky, now seemed one mass of shadow.
Yes, sir.
Whose house is it?
Mr. Rochester's.
Do you know Mr. Rochester?
No, I have never seen him.
He is not resident then.
No,
Can you tell me where he is?
I cannot.
You are not a servant at the hall, of course. You are.
He stopped and ran his eye over my dress, which, as usual, was quite simple. A black merino cloak, black beaver bonnet, neither of them half fine enough for a lady's maid. He seemed puzzled to decide what I was. I helped him.
I am the governess.
Ah, the governess. Deuce take me if I had not forgotten the governess.
And again my raiment underwent scrutiny. In 2 minutes he rose from the stile. His face expressed pain when he now tried to move.
I cannot commission you to fetch help, but you may help me a little yourself if you will be so kind.
Yes, sir.
You have not an umbrella that I can use as a stick.
No.
Try to get hold of my horse's bridle and lead him to me. You are not afraid?
I should have been afraid to touch a horse when alone, but when told to do so, I was disposed to obey. I put down my muff on the stile and went to the tall steed. I endeavored to catch the bridle, but it was a spirited thing and would not let me come near its head. I made effort on effort, though in vain. Meantime, I was mortally afraid of its trampling forefoot. The traveler waited and watched for some time, and at last he laughed.
I see. The mountain will never be brought to Mahomet, so all you can do is to aid Mahomet to go to the mountain. I must beg of you to come here.
I came.
Excuse me. Necessity compels me to make you useful.
He laid a heavy hand on my shoulder and, leaning on me with some stress, limped to his horse. Having once caught the bridle, he mastered it directly and sprang into the saddle, grimacing grimly as he made an effort to wrench his sprain.
Now,
He said, releasing his upper lip from a hard bite.
just hand me my whip. It lies there under the hedge.
I sought it and found it.
Thank you. And now make haste with the letter to Hay and return as fast as you can.
A touch of spurred heel, and he made his horse first start, then rear, then bound away. The dog rushed in his traces. All three vanished, like the heath that in the wildness and the wild wind whirls away. I took up my muff and walked on. The incident had occurred and was gone from me. It was an incident of no more, no moment, no romance, no interest in that sense, yet it marked with change the single hour of a monotonous life. My help had been in need and claimed. I had given it. It was pleased to have done something, trivial, transitory though it was, the deed was, and yet it was an active thing, and I was weary of existence all passive. The new face, too, was like a new picture introduced into a gallery of memory. It was dissimilar to all the others hanging there, firstly because it was masculine, and secondly because it was dark, strong, and stern. I had still before me when I entered Hay and slipped the letter into the post office. I saw it was I, walked fast downhill all the way home, and when I came to the stile, I stopped a minute, looked around and listened, with an idea that a horse's hoofs might ring on the causeway again, and that a rider might cloak in a ganache like Newfoundland dog might be again apparent. I saw only the hedge and the pollard windows before me rising up still straight to meet the moonbeams. I heard only the faintest waft of wind blowing fitfully among the trees round Thornfield. A mile distance, when I glanced down in the direction of the murmurs, my eye traversing the front hall caught a light kindling in the window. It reminded me that it was late. I hurried on. I did not like re-entering Thornfield. To pass its threshold was to return to stagnation. To cross silent hall, to ascend to the darksome staircase, to seek my own lonely little room, and then to meet tranquil Mrs. Fairfax and spend a long winter evening with her only was to quell the wholly faint excitement weakened by my walk. Over again my faculties, the viewless fetters of my uniform, and to still existence, of an existence whose very privileges of security and ease I was becoming incapable of appreciating. What would it have done me at that time to have tossed in my storms to an uncertain, struggling life, and have been taught by rough and bitter experiences too long to claim in the midst for now repined, yet just as much good as it would do to have a man tire of sitting still in the too easy chair, to take a long walk, and just as natural was to wish to stir under my circumstances it would be under his. I lingered in the gates. I lingered on the lawn. I paced backwards and forwards on the pavement. The shutters of the glass door were closed. I could not see it in the interior. Both my eyes and spirit seemed drawn to the gloomy house, to the grey hollow filled with rayless cells as it appeared to me, to that sky expanded before me, the blue sea absorbed with taint of cloud, the moon descending at the solemn march, her orb seeming to look up as she left the hilltops from behind which she had come, far and further below, and aspired to the zenith midnight dark at its fathomless depth and measureless distance for those trembling stars that followed her course. They made my heart tremble. My veins glow when I viewed them. Little things recall us to earth. The clock struck in the hall. That sufficed. I turned from the moon and stars and opened the side door and went in. The hall was not dark, nor yet was lit by light. Only by the high-hung bronze lamp, the warm glow suffused it both by the lowest steps of the oak staircase. This ruddy shine issued the great dining room, whose two-leaved doors stood open and showed a genial fire in the grate, glancing on the marble hearth and brass fire irons, revealing the purple drapes and the polished furniture, and the most pleasant radiance. It revealed, too, a group near the mantelpiece. I had scarcely caught it and scarcely become aware of the cheerful mingling of voices amongst them seemed to distinguish the tones of Adelaide when the door closed. I hastened to Mrs. Fairfax's room, and there was a fire too, but no candle, and no Mrs. Fairfax. Instead, all alone, sitting upright on the rug, gazing in gravity of blaze, I beheld a large, black and white, long-haired dog, just like Guy Trash of the Lane. It was so like it that I went forward and said,
Pilot?
The thing got up and came to me and snuffed me. I caressed it, and he wagged his great tail, but he looked an eerie creature to be alone with, and I could not tell whence he had come. The bell rang, for I wanted a candle, and I wanted, too, to get an account of this visitation. Leah entered.
What dog is this?
He came with the master.
With whom?
With master, Mr. Rochester. He just arrived.
Indeed. And is Mrs. Fairfax with him?
Yes, and Miss Adele. They are in the dining room, and John has gone for a surgeon, for Master has had an accident. His horse fell, and his ankle is sprained.
Did the horse fall in Hay Lane?
Yes, coming downhill. It slipped on some ice.
Ah, bring me a candle, will you, Leah?
They brought it. She entered, followed by Mrs. Fairfax, who repeated the news, adding that Mrs. de Carter, the surgeon, was come and was now with Mr. Rochester. Then she hurried out to give orders about tea, and I went upstairs to take off my things. Mr. Rochester, it seems, by the surgeon's orders, went to bed early that night and did not rise till next morning. When he did come down, it was to attend to business. His agent and some other tenants were arrived and wanting to speak to him. Dela and I had now to vacate the library. It would be in daily requisition as a reception room for callers. A fire was lit in the future schoolroom. I discerned in the course of the morning that it was Thornfield Hall was a changed place. No longer silent as a church, it echoed every hour or two with a knock on the door or a clang on the bell. Steps, too, often traversed the hall, and new voices spoke in different keys below. The rill of the outer world was flowing through it. It had a master, and for my part, I liked it better. Adele was not easy to teach that day. She could not apply herself. She kept running to the door and looking over the banister to see if she could get a glimpse of Mr. Rochester. Then she coined pretexts to go downstairs in order, as I shrewdly suspected, to visit the library, where she knew she was not wanted. Then, when I got a little angry and made her sit still, she continued to talk necessitally of her
Ami, Monsieur Edward Fairfax de Rochester.
As she dubbed him, and as I had not heard his pronouncements, I had to conjecture his presence he had brought her, for it appeared he had been intimidated the night before that when his luggage came to Millcote, there would be found amongst a little box whose contents she had in interest.
Et cela doit signifier qu'il y aura là-dedans un cadeau pour moi et peut-être pour vous aussi, mademoiselle. Monsieur a parlé de vous. Il m'a demandé le nom de ma gouvernante et si elle n'était pas une petite personne assez mince et un peu pâle. J'ai dit que oui, car c'est vrai. Ce n'est pas mademoiselle.
I and my people dined as usual in Miss Fairfax's parlor, and the afternoon was wild and snowy as we passed at the schoolroom. At dark, I allowed Adela to put away books and work and to run downstairs for a comparative silence below, and from the cessation of peals of the doorbell, I conjectured that Mr. Rochester was now at liberty. Left alone, I walked to the window, but nothing was to be seen thence. Twilight snowflakes, together with thickened air, and hid the very shrubs of the lawn. I let down the curtain and went back to the fireside. In the clear embers, I was tracing a view not unlike a picture I remember to have seen in the castle of Heidelberg on the Rhine. And when Mrs. Fairfax came in, breaking up her entrance in the fiery mosaic I'd been piercing together, and scattering too some heavy, unwelcome thoughts that I was beginning to throng my solitude.
Mr. Rochester would be glad if you and your pupil would take tea with him in the drawing room this evening. He's been so much engaged all day that he should not ask to see you before.
When is his tea time?
Oh, at 6 o'clock. He keeps early hours in the country. You had better change your frock now. I will go with you and fasten it. Here is a candle.
Is it necessary to change my frock?
Yes, you had better. I always dress through the evening when Mr. Rochester's here.
It's a different color. This additional ceremony seemed somewhat stately. However, I repaired to my room, and with Mrs. Fairfax's aid, replaced my black stiff dress with one black silk, the best and only additional one I had, except for one of light gray, which, in my lowered notions, was a toilet I thought too fine to be worn except on first-rate occasions.
You want a brooch?
I had a single little pearl ornament which Miss Temple gave me as a parting keepsake. I put it on, then we went downstairs. Unused as I was to strangers, it was rather a trial to appear thus formally summoned to Mr. Rochester's presence. I let Mrs. Fairfax precede me into the dining room and kept her in shade as we crossed that apartment. And passing arch, whose curtain was now dropped, entered the elegant recesses beyond. Two wax candles stood lighted on the table and two on the mantelpiece, basking in the light of heat of a superb fire, lay Pilot. Adele knelt near him. Half reclined on a couch appeared Mr. Rochester, his foot supported by a cushion. He was looking at Adele and the dog, and the fire shone full on his face. I knew my traveler by his broad and jetty eyebrows, his square forehead made squarer by the horizontal sweep of his black hair. I recognized his decisive nose, more remarkable for character than beauty, his full nostrils, denoting, I thought, color, his grim mouth, chin, and jaw. Yes, all three were very grim, and no mistake. His shape, now divested of the cloak, I perceived harmonized in squareness with his physiognomy. I supposed it was a good figure in the athletic sense of the term, broad-chested and thin-flanked, though neither tall nor graceful. Mr. Rochester must have been aware of the entrance of Mrs. Fairfax and myself, but it appeared that he was not in the mood to notice us, for he never lifted his head as we approached.
Here is Miss Eyre, sir.
As said Mrs. Fairfax in her quiet way, he bowed, still not taking his eyes from the group of dog and child.
Let Miss Eyre be seated.
And then there was something in the forced, stiff bow and the impatient yet formal tone which seemed further to express.
What the deuce is it to me whether Miss Eyre be there or not? At this moment, I am not disposed to accost her.
I sat down quite disembarrassed. The reception not finished politeness would probably have refused me. I could not have returned or repaid by answering grace or eloquence on my part, but her caprice laid me on no obligation. On the contrary, a decent quiescence under the freak of manner gave me the advantage. Besides, the eccentricity of the proceeding was piquant. I felt interested to see how he would go on. He went on like a statue would, that is, neither spoke nor moved. Mrs. Fairfax seemed to think it necessary that someone should be amiable and should begin to talk, kindly as usual, and as usual rather trite. She condoled with him on the pressure of the business he had had that day, on the annoyance it must have been to him, that painful sprain, and she commented with his patience and perseverance as what was going through him.
Madam, I should like some tea,
Was the sole rejoinder she got. She hastened to ring the bell, and when the tea came, she proceeded to arrange the cups and spoons, etc., with insidious celerity. I and Adelaide went to the table, but the master did not leave his couch.
Will you hand Mr. Rochester his cup?
Said Mr. Fairfax to me.
Adele might perhaps spill it.
I did as requested, and he took his cup from my hand. Adela, thinking a moment propitious to making a request in my favor, cried out,
N'est-ce pas, messieurs, qu'il y a un cadeau pour Mademoiselle Eyre dans votre petit coffre?
Who talks of cadeau?
He answered gruffly.
Did you expect a present, Miss Eyre? Are you fond of presents?
He had searched my face with his eyes, and I saw a dark, irate, and piercing.
I hardly know, sir. I have little experience of them. They are generally thought as pleasant things.
Generally thought. But what do you think?
I should be obliged to take time, sir, before I give you an answer worthy of your acceptance. A present has many faces to it, has it not? And one should consider all before pronouncing opinion as to its nature.
Miss Eyre, you are not so unsophisticated as Adele. She demands a cadeau clamorously the moment she sees me. You beat about the bush.
Because I have less confidence in my deserts than Adele has. If she can prefer the claim of old acquaintance and the right, too, of custom, for she says you have always been in the habits of giving her playthings. But if I had to make out a case, I should be puzzled, since I am a stranger and have done nothing to entitle me to an acknowledgement.
Oh, don't fall back on over-modesty. I have examined Adele and find you have taken great pains with her. She is not bright. She has no talents. Yet in a short time, she has made much improvement.
Sir, you have now given me my cadeau. I'm obliged to you. It is the meed teachers most covet, praise of their pupils' progress.
Huh.
He took his tea in silence.
Come to the fire.
Said the master when the tray was taken away and Mrs. Fairfax settled into her corner with her knitting, while Adele was leading me by the hand around the room, showing me the beautiful books and ornaments and consoles and chiffoniers. We obeyed, as in duty bound. Adele wanted to take a seat on my knee, but she was ordered to amuse herself with Pilot.
You have been resident in my house 3 months.
Yes, sir.
And you came from?
From Lowood School in Shire.
Ah, charitable concern. How long were you there?
8 years.
8 years? You must be tenacious of life. I thought half the time in such a place would have done up any constitution. No wonder you have rather the look of another world. I marveled where you had got that sort of face. When you came on me in Hay Lane last night, I thought unaccountably of fairy tales and had half a mind to demand whether you had bewitched my horse. I'm not sure yet. Who are your parents?
I have none.
Nor ever had, I suppose. Do you remember them?
No.
I thought not. And so you were waiting for your people when you sat on that stile?
For whom, sir?
For the men in green. It was a proper moonlit evening for them. Did I break through one of your rings that you spread that damned ice on the causeway?
I shook my head.
The men in green all forsook England 100 years ago.
I said, speaking as seriously as he had done.
And not even in Hay Lane or the fields about it could you find a trace of them. I don't think either summer or harvest or winter moon will ever shine on their revels more.
Mrs. Fairfax had dropped her knitting and with raised eyebrows seemed wondering at what sort of talk this was.
Well, if you disown parents, you must have some sort of kinsfolk, uncles, aunts?
No, none that I ever saw.
And your home?
I have none.
Where do your brothers and sisters live?
I have no brothers and sisters.
Who recommended you to come here?
I advertised and Mrs. Fairfax answered my advertisement.
Yes,
Lady who now knew what ground we were upon.
and I am daily thankful for the choice Providence led me to make. Miss Eyre has been an invaluable companion to me and a kind and careful teacher to Adele.
Don't trouble yourself to give her a character. Eulogiums will not bias me. I shall judge for myself. She began by felling my horse.
Sir?
Fairfax?
I have to thank her for this sprain.
The widow looked bewildered.
Miss Eyre, have you ever lived in a town?
No, sir.
Have you seen much society?
None but the pupils and teachers of Lowood, and now the inmates of Thornfield.
Have you read much?
Only such books as came my way, and they have not been numerous or very learned.
You have lived the life of a nun. No doubt you are well drilled in religious forms. Brocklehurst, who I understand directs Lowood, is a parson, is he not?
Yes, sir.
And you girls probably worshipped him, as a convent full of religieuses would worship their director.
Oh, no.
You are very cool. No, what? A novice not worship her priest? That sounds blasphemous.
I disliked Mr. Brocklehurst, and I was not alone in the feeling. He is a harsh man, at once pompous and meddling. He cut off our hair and, for economy's sake, bought us bad needles and thread, with which we could hardly sew.
That was very false economy.
Fairfax, who now again caught a drift of the dialogue.
And was that the head and front of his offending?
He starved us when he had the sole superintendence of the provision department before the committee was appointed. And he bored us with long lectures once a week, with evening readings from books of his own inditing about sudden death and judgments, which made us afraid to go to bed.
What age were you when you went to Lowood?
About 10.
You stayed there 8 years. You are now then 18.
I assented.
Arithmetic, you see, is useful. Without its aid, I should hardly have been able to guess your age. It is a point difficult to fix where the features and countenance are so much at variance, as in your case. And now, what did you learn at Lowood? Can you play?
A little.
Of course, that is the established answer. Go into the library. I mean, if you please, excuse my tone of command. I am used to say, do this, and it is done. I cannot alter my customary habits for one new inmate. Go then into the library, take a candle with you, leave the door open, sit down to the piano, and play a tune.
I departed, obeying his directions.
Enough.
Called out in a few minutes.
You play a little, I see. Like any other English schoolgirl, perhaps rather better than some, but not well.
I closed the piano and returned. Mr. Rochester continued.
Adele showed me some sketches this morning, which she said were yours. I don't know whether they were entirely of your doing. Probably a master aided you.
No, indeed.
I projected.
Ah, that pricks pride. Well, fetch me your portfolio, if you can vouch for its contents being original, but don't pass your word unless you are certain. I can recognize patchwork.
Then I will say nothing, and you shall judge for yourself, sir.
I brought the portfolio from the library.
Approach the table.
I wheeled it to his couch. I tell him Miss Fairfax drew near to see the pictures.
No crowding. Take the drawings from my hand as I finish with them, but don't push your faces up to mine.
He deliberately scrutinized each sketch and painting. 3 he laid aside. The others, he examined them. He swept from him.
Take them off to the other table, Mrs. Fairfax, and look at them with Adele. You.
Glancing at me.
Resume your seat and answer my questions. I perceive those pictures were done by one hand. Was that hand yours?
Yes.
And when did you find time to do them? They have taken much time and some thought.
I did them in my last 2 vacations I spent at Lowood, when I had no other occupation.
Where did you get your copies?
Out of my head.
That head I see now on your shoulders.
Yes, sir.
Has it other furniture of the same kind within?
I should think it may have. I should hope better.
Spread the pictures before him and again surveyed them alternatively. While he was so occupied, I will tell you, reader, that they are, and first I must premise that they are nothing wonderful. The subjects had indeed risen vividly on my mind. As I saw them with a spiritual eye before attempting to embroider them, they were striking, but my hand would not second my fancy, and in each case it had wrought out but a pale portrait of the thing I had conceived. These pictures were in watercolors. The first represented clouds, low and livid, rolling over a swollen sea. All the distance was an eclipse too, so it was in the foreground, or rather the nearest billows, for there was no land. One gleam of light lifted into relief a half-submerged mast on which sat a cormorant, dark and large, with wings flecked with foam, its beak held with a gold bracelet and a set of gems that had touched with its brilliant tints of my palette could yield, and the glittering distinctiveness of my pencil could impart. Sinking below the bird and mast, a drowned corpse glancing through the green water. A fair aim was only limb clearly visible, hence the bracelet had been washed or torn. The second picture contained for foreground only the dim peak of a hill, with grass and some leaves slanting as if by the breeze. Beyond and above spread an expansive sky, dark blue at twilight. Rising into the sky was a woman's shape to the bust, portrayed in tints of dusk and soft as I could combine. The dim forehead was crowded with a star, and lineaments below were seen as though suffusion of vapor. The eyes shone dark and wild, the hair streamed shadowy like beamless clouds torn by a storm of electric travail. On the neck lay a pale reflection like moonlight, the same faint luster touched by the train of thin clouds which rose and bowed this vision of the evening star. The third showed a pinnacle of an iceberg pierced by a polar winter sky. A muster of northern lights reared in the dim lances, close seared along the horizon, throwing into the distance rose and foreground a head. A colossal head inclined toward the iceberg and resting against it. Thin hands joined under the forehead and supporting it drew up before the lower features of a sable veil, a brow white bloodless, white as bone, and an eye hollow, fixed, blank of meaning, but for the glassiness of despair alone were visible. Above the temples, amidst a wreathed turban folds of black drapery, vague in its character and consistency, as cloud gleamed with a ring of white flame, gleamed with sparkle of more lurid tinge. This pale crescent was the likeness of a kingly crown. What a diadem was, the shape of which had none.
Were you happy when you painted these pictures?
Asked Mr. Rochester presently.
I was absorbed, sir, and I was happy. To paint them, in short, was to enjoy one of the keenest pleasures I have ever known.
That is not saying much. Your pleasures, by your own account, have been few, but I dare say you did exist in a kind of artist's dreamland while you blent and arranged these strange tints. Did you sit at them long each day?
I had nothing else to do because it was the vacation, and I sat with them from morning till noon and from noon till night. The length of the midsummer days favored my inclination to apply.
And you felt self-satisfied with the result of your ardent labors?
Oh, far from it. I was tormented by the contrast between my idea and my handiwork. In each case, I had imagined something which I was quite powerless to realize.
Not quite. You have secured the shadow of your thought, but no more, probably. You had not enough of the artist's skill and science to give it full being, yet the drawings are, for a schoolgirl, peculiar. As to the thoughts, they are elfish. These eyes in the evening star, you must have seen in a dream. How could you make them look so clear and yet not at all brilliant? For the planet above quells their rays, and what meaning is that in their solemn depth? And who taught you to paint wind? There's a high gale in that sky, and on this hilltop. Where did you see Latmos? For that is Latmos there. Put the drawings away.
I had scarce tied up the drawings of the portfolio when, looking at his watch, he said abruptly,
It is 9 o'clock. What are you about, Miss Eyre, to let Adele sit up so long? Take her to bed.
Adele went to kiss him before quitting the room. He endured the caress, but scarcely seemed to relish it more than Pilate would have done, no more so.
I wish you all a good night now,
He said, making a movement of his hand towards the door in a token that he was tired of our company and wished to dismiss us. Mrs. Fairfax folded up her knitting. I took my portfolio. We curtsied to him, received a frigid bow in return, and so withdrew.
You said Mr. Rochester was not strikingly peculiar, Mrs. Fairfax.
I observed when I rejoined her in the room after putting Adele to bed.
Well, is he?
I think so. He is very changeful and abrupt.
True. No doubt he may appear so to a stranger, but I am so accustomed to his manner, I never think of it. And then, if he has peculiarities of temper, allowance should be made.
Why?
Partly because it is his nature, and we can none of us help our nature, and partly because he has painful thoughts, no doubt, to harass him and make his spirits unequal.
What about?
Family troubles, for one thing.
But he has no family.
Not now, but he has had, or at least relatives. He lost his elder brother a few years since.
His elder brother?
Yes, The present Mr. Rochester has not been very long in possession of the property, only about 9 years.
9 years is a tolerable time. Was he so very fond of his brother as to be still inconsolable for his loss?
Why, no, perhaps not. I believe there were some misunderstandings between them. Mr. Roland Rochester was not quite just to Mr. Edward, and perhaps he prejudiced his father against him. The old gentleman was fond of money and anxious to keep the family estate together. He did not like to diminish the property by division, and yet he was anxious that Mr. Edward should have wealth too, to keep up the consequence of the name. And soon after he was of age, some steps were taken that were not quite fair and made a great deal of mischief. Old Mr. Rochester and Mr. Roland combined to bring Mr. Edward into what he considered a painful position for the sake of making his fortune. What the precise nature of that position was, I never clearly knew, but his spirit could not brook what he had to suffer in it. He is not very forgiving. He broke with his family, and now for many years, he has led an unsettled kind of life. I don't think he has ever been resident at Thornfield for a fortnight together, says the death of his brother, without a will left him master of the state, and indeed, no wonder he shuns the old place.
Why should he shun it?
Perhaps he thinks it's gloomy.
The answer was evasive. I should have liked something clearer, but Mrs. Fairfax either could not or would not give me a more explicit information of the origin of the nature of Mr. Rochester's trials. She averred there was a mystery to herself, and that she knew was chiefly from conjecture. It was evident indeed that she wished me to drop the subject, which I did accordingly.
Chapter 14. For several days, am I meant to read this? It's highlighted, but I'm not sure there's a reason.
I don't know, it's highlighted on mine too.
Oh, great, you read it then.
Sorry.
For several subsequent days, I saw little of Mr. Rochester. In the mornings, he seemed much engaged with business, and in the afternoon, gentlemen from Millcote or the neighborhood called and sometimes stayed to dine with him. When his sprain was well enough to admit him his horse exercise, he rode out a good deal, probably to return these visits, as he generally did not come back till late at night. During this interval, even Adele was seldom sent for to his presence, and all my acquaintance with him was confined to an occasional confer in the hall, on the stairs, and in the gallery, when he would sometimes pass me haughtily and coldly, just acknowledging my presence with a distant nod or a cool glance, and sometimes bow and smile with gentlemanly-like affability. His changes of moods did not offend me, because I saw it had nothing to do with their alteration. The episode depended on the causes quite disconnected from me. One day he had company to dinner and had sent for my portfolio in order doubtless to exhibit its contents. The gentleman went away early to attend a public meeting in Millcote, and Mrs. Fairfax informed me that the night being wet and inclement, Mr. Rochester did not accompany them. Soon after they were gone, he rang the bell. A messenger came and said I and Adele were to go downstairs. I brushed Adele's hair and made her neat, and having ascertained that I was myself in my usual Quaker trim, and there was nothing to be retouched, all being too close and plain, braided locks included, to admit of any disarrangement, we descended. Adele, wondering whether the petit coiffre was at length come, for owing to some mistake its arrival had hitherto been delayed. She was gratified. There it stood, a little carton on a table. When we entered the dining room, she appeared to know it by instinct.
Ah, ma boîte, ma boîte.
He exclaimed, running towards it.
Yes, there is your boîte at last. Take it into a corner, you genuine daughter of Paris, and amuse yourself with disemboweling it.
He said in the deep, rather sarcastic voice of Mr. Rochester, proceeding from the depths of an immense easy chair at the fireside.
And mind, don't bother me with any details of the anatomical process or any notice of the condition of the entrails. Let your operation be conducted in silence. Tiens-toi tranquille, enfant, comprends-tu?
Adele seemed scarcely to need the warning. She had already returned to the sofa with her treasure and was busy untying the cord which secured the lid. Having removed its impediment and lifting a certain silvery envelopes of tissue paper, she merely exclaimed,
Ciel, que c'est beau!
And returned absorbed in ecstatic contemplation.
Is Miss Eyre there?
Now demanded the master, half rising from his seat to look around the door near which I stood.
Ah, well, come forward. Be seated here.
To a chair near his own.
I'm not fond of the prattle of children, for, old bachelor as I am, I have no pleasant associations connected with their lisp. It would be intolerable to me to pass a whole evening tete-a-tete with a brat. Don't draw that chair farther off, Miss Eyre. Sit down exactly where I placed it, if you please. That is, confound these civilities. I continually forget them, nor do I particularly affect simple-minded old ladies. By the by, I must have mine in mind. It won't do to neglect her. She is a Fairfax, or wed to one, and blood is said to be thicker than water.
He rang and dispatched an invitation to Mrs. Fairfax, who soon arrived, knitting basket in hand.
Good evening, madam. I sent to you for a charitable purpose. I have forbidden Adele to talk to me about her presence, and she is bursting with repletion. Have the goodness to serve her as auditress and interlocutress. It will be one of the most benevolent acts you will ever perform.
Adele indeed no sooner saw Mrs. Fairfax than she summoned her to the sofa and quickly filled her lap with porcelain, the ivory waxen contents of her bought, pouring out meantime explanations of raptures in such broken English as she was mistress of.
Now I have performed the part of a good host. Put my guests into the way of amusing each other, I ought to be at liberty to attend my own pleasure. Miss Eyre, draw your chair still a little farther forward. You are yet too far back. I cannot see you without disturbing my position in this comfortable chair, which I have no mind to do.
I did as I was bid, though I would much rather have remained somewhat in the shade. But Mr. Rochester had such a direct way of giving orders, it seemed a matter of course to obey him promptly. We were, as I have said, in the dining room. The luster which had been lit for dinner filled the room with a festal breath of light. The large fire was all red and clear. Purple curtains hung rich and ample before the lofty windows and loftier arch. Everything was still, save the subdued chat of Adele, she dared not speak loud, and filling up each pause and beating of the winter rain against the panes. Mr. Rochester, as he sat in his damask-covered chair, looked different to what I'd seen him look before, not quite so stern, much less gloomy. There was a smile on his lips, and his eyes sparkled, whether with wine or not, I'm not sure, but I think it very probable. He was, in short, in this after-dinner mood, more expanded and genial and more self-indulgent than the frigid and rigid temper of the morning. Still, he looked preciously grim, cushioning his massive head against the swirling back of his chair and receiving the light of the fire on his granite-hued features. And in his great dark eyes, for he had great dark eyes, and very fine eyes too, not without a certain change in their depths sometimes, which, if it was not softness, reminded you at least of that feeling. He had been looking 2 minutes at the fire, and then I had been looking at the same length of time at him, when, turning suddenly, he caught my gaze fastened on my physiognomy.
You examine me, Miss Eyre. Do you think me handsome?
I should, if I had deliberated, have replied to the question by something conventionally vague and politing, but the answer somehow slipped from my tongue before I was aware.
No, sir.
Ah. By my word, there is something singular about you. You have the air of a little nonette, quaint, quiet, grave, and simple as you sit with your hands before you and your eyes generally bent on the carpet, except, by the by, when they are directed piercingly to my face, as just now, for instance. And when one asks you a question or makes a remark to which you are obliged to reply, you rap out a round rejoinder, which, if not blunt, is at least brusque. What do you mean by it?
Sir, I was too plain. I beg your pardon. I ought to have replied that it was not easy to give an impromptu answer to a question about appearances, that tastes mostly differ, and that beauty is of little consequence, or something of that sort.
You ought to have replied no such thing. Beauty of little consequence, indeed. And so, under pretense of softening the previous outrage, of stroking and soothing me into placidity, you stick a sly penknife under my ear? Go on. What fault do you find with me, pray? I suppose I have all my limbs and all my features like any other man.
Mr. Rochester, allow me to disown my first answer. I intended no pointed repartee. It was only a blunder.
Just so. I think so. And you shall be answerable for it. Criticize me. Does my forehead not please you?
He lifted the sable waves of his hair, which lay horizontally over his brow, and showed a solid enough mass of intellectual organs, but an abrupt deficiency where a suave sign of benevolence should have risen.
Now, ma'am, am I a fool?
Far from it, sir. You would perhaps think me rude if I inquired in return whether you are a philanthropist.
There again, another stick of the penknife, when she pretended to pat my head. And that is because I said I did not like the society of children and old women, low be it spoken. No, young lady, I am not a general philanthropist, but I bear a conscience.
He pointed to the pronouncements he had said to indict the faculty, with which, unfortunately for him, were sufficiently conspicuous, giving, indeed, a mock breath to the upper part of his head.
And besides, I once had a kind of rude tenderness of heart. When I was as old as you, I was a feeling fellow enough, partial to the unfledged, unfostered, and unlucky. But fortune has knocked me about since. She has even kneaded me with her knuckles, and now I flatter myself I am hard and tough as an India rubber ball. Pervious, though, through a chink or two still, and with one sentient point in the middle of the lump. Yes. Does that leave hope for me?
Hope of what, sir?
Of my final retransformation from India rubber back to flesh.
Decidedly, he has had too much wine.
I thought, and I did not know what answer was to make of this queer question. How could I tell whether he was capable of being transformed?
You look very much puzzled, Miss Eyre. And though you are not pretty any more than I am handsome, yet a puzzled air becomes you. Besides, it is convenient, for it keeps those searching eyes of yours away from my physiognomy and busies them with the worsted flowers of the rug. So, puzzle on. Young lady, I'm disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight.
With this announcement, he rose from his chair and stood, leaning his arm on a marble mantelpiece. In that attitude, his shape was seen plainly as well as his face, his usual breadth of chest, disproportionate almost to the height of his limb. I am sure most people would have thought him an ugly man, yet there was so much unconscious pride in his port, so much ease in his demeanor, such a look of complete indifference to his own external appearance, so haughty a reliance on the power of other qualities, intrinsic or adventurous, to atone for lack of mere personal attractiveness, that in looking at him, one inevitably shared the indifference, and even in a blind, imperfect sense, put faith in that confidence.
I am disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight. And that is why I sent for you. The fire and the chandelier were not sufficient company for me, nor would Pilate have been, for none of these can talk. Adele is a degree better, but still far below the mark. Mrs. Fairfax ditto. You, I am persuaded, can suit me, if you will. You puzzled me the first evening I invited you down here. I've almost forgotten you since. Other ideas have driven yours from my head, but tonight I'm resolved to be at ease, to dismiss what importunes and recall what pleases. It would please me now to draw you out, to learn more of you. Therefore speak.
Instead of speaking, I smiled, and not a very complacent or submissive smile either.
Speak.
What about, sir?
Whatever you like. I leave both the choice of subject and the manner of treating it entirely to yourself.
Accordingly, I sat and said nothing. If he expects me to talk for the mere sake of talking and showing off, he will find he has addressed himself to the wrong person, I thought.
You are dumb, Miss Eyre.
I was dumb still. He bent his head a little towards me, and with a single hasty glance seemed to dive into my eyes.
Stubborn and annoyed. Ah, it is consistent. I put my request in an absurd, almost insolent form. Miss Eyre, I beg your pardon. The fact is, once for all, I don't wish to treat you like an inferior, that is. I claim only such superiority as must result from 20 years difference in age and a century's advance in experience. This is legitimate, je tiens, as Adele would say. And it is by virtue of this superiority and this alone that I desire you to have the goodness to talk to me a little now and divert my thoughts, which are galled with dwelling on one point, cankering as a rusty nail.
He had deigned an explanation, almost an apology, and I did not feel insensible to his condescension and would not seem so.
I am willing to amuse you, if I can, sir, quite willingly, but I cannot introduce a topic, because how do I know what will interest you? Ask me questions, and I will do my best to answer them.
Then, in the first place, do you agree with me that I have the right to be a little masterful, abrupt, perhaps exacting sometimes on the grounds I stated, namely that I am old enough to be your father, and that I have battled through a varied experience with many men of many nations and roamed over half the globe, while you have lived quietly with one set of people in one home?
Do as you please, sir.
Well, that is no answer, or rather it is a very irritating, because a very evasive one. Reply clearly.
I don't think, sir, that you have a right to command me merely because you are older than I or because you've seen more of the world than I have. Your claim to superiority depends on the use you have made of your time and experience.
Promptly spoken. But I won't allow that, seeing that it would never suit my case, as I have made an indifferent, not to say a bad, use of both advantages. Leaving superiority out of the question, then you must still agree to receive my orders now and then, without being piqued or hurt by the tone of command. Will you?
I smiled. I thought to myself, Mr. Rochester is peculiar. He seems to forget that he pays me £30 per annum for receiving his orders.
The smile is very well.
Catching instantly the passing expression.
But speak, too.
I was thinking, sir, that very few masters would trouble themselves to inquire whether or not their paid subordinates were piqued and hurt by their orders.
Paid subordinates? What? You are my paid subordinate, are you? Oh, yes, I had forgotten the salary. Well then, on that mercenary ground, will you agree to let me hector a little?
No, sir, not on that ground, but on the ground that you did forget it and that you care whether or not a dependent is comfortable in his dependency. I agree heartily.
And will you consent to dispense with a great many conventional forms and phrases without thinking that the omission arises from insolence?
I am sure, sir, I should never mistake informality for insolence. One I rather like, the other nothing freeborn would submit to, even for a salary.
Humbug. Most things freeborn will submit to anything for a salary. Therefore, keep to yourself and don't venture on generalities of which you are intensely ignorant. However, I mentally shake hands with you for your answer, despite its inaccuracy, and as much for the manner in which it was said as for the substance of the speech. The manner was frank and sincere. One does not often see such a manner, no. On the contrary, affectation, or coldness, or stupid, coarse-minded misapprehension of one's meaning are the usual rewards of candor. Not 3 in 3,000 raw school-girl governesses would have answered me as you have just done. But I don't mean to flatter you. If you are cast in a different mold to the majority, it is no merit of yours. Nature did it. And then after all, I go too fast in my conclusions for what I yet know. You maybe know better than the rest. You may have intolerable defects to counterbalance your few good points.
And
And so may you.
I thought. My eye met his as the eye crossed my mind. He seemed to read a glance, answering it if its import had been spoken as well as imagined.
Yes. Yes, you are right. I have plenty of faults of my own, I know it. And I don't wish to palliate them, I assure you. God wot, I need not be too severe about others. I have a past existence, a series of deeds, a color of life to contemplate within my own breast, which might well call my sneers and censures from my neighbors to myself. I started, or rather, for like other defaulters, I like to lay half the blame on ill fortune and adverse circumstances, was thrust onto a wrong tack at the age of 21, and have never recovered the right course since. But I might have been very different. I might have been as good as you, wiser, almost as stainless. I envy you your peace of mind, your clean conscience, your unpolluted memory. Little girl, a memory without blot or contamination must be an exquisite treasure, an inexhaustible source of pure refreshment, is it not?
How was your memory when you were 18, sir?
All right then. Limpid, salubrious, no gush of bilge water had turned it to fetid puddle. I was your equal at 18, quite your equal. Nature meant me to be, on the whole, a good man, Miss Eyre. One of the better kind, and you see, I am not so. You would say you don't see it. At least I flatter myself I read as much in your eye. Beware, by the by, what you express with that organ. I am quick at interpreting its language. Then take my word for it. I am not a villain. You are not to suppose that, not to attribute to me any such bad eminence, but owing, I verily believe, rather to circumstances than to my natural bent, I am a trite, commonplace sinner, hackneyed in all the poor, petty dissipations with which the rich and worthless try to put on life. Do you wonder that I avow this to you? Know that in the course of your future life, you will often find yourself elected the involuntary confidant of your acquaintance' secrets. People will instinctively find out, as I have done, that it is not your forte to tell of yourself, but to listen while others talk of themselves. They will feel, too, that you listen with no malevolent scorn of their indiscretion, but with a kind of innate sympathy, not the less comforting and encouraging, because it is very unobtrusive in its manifestations.
How do you know? How can you guess all this, sir?
I know it well. Therefore, I proceed almost as freely as if I were writing my thoughts in a diary. You would say, I should have been superior to circumstances. So I should. But you see, I was not. When fate wronged me, I had not the wisdom to remain cool. I turned desperate. Then I degenerated. Now, when any vicious simpleton excites my disgust by his paltry ribaldry, I cannot flatter myself that I am better than he. I am forced to confess that he and I are on a level. I wish I had stood firm. God knows I do. Dread remorse when you are tempted to err, Miss Eyre. Remorse is the poison of life.
Repentance is said to be its cure, sir.
It is not its cure. Reformation may be its cure, and I could reform. I have strength yet for that, but what is the use in thinking of it, hampered, burdened, cursed as I am? Besides, since happiness is irrevocably denied me, I have a right to get pleasure out of life, and I will get it, cost what it may.
Then you will degenerate still more, sir.
Possibly. Yet why should I if I can get sweet, fresh pleasure? And I may get it as sweet and fresh as the wild honey the bee gathers on the moor.
It will sting. It will taste bitter, sir.
How do you know? You never tried it. How very serious. How very solemn you look. And you are as ignorant of the matter as this cameo head.
Taking wood from the mantelpiece.
You have no right to preach to me, you neophyte, that have not passed the porch of life and are absolutely unacquainted with its mysteries.
I only remind you of your own words, sir. You said error brought remorse, and you pronounced remorse the poison of existence.
And who talks of error now? I scarcely think the notion that flitted across my brain was an error. I believe it was an inspiration rather than a temptation. It was very genial, very soothing. I know that. Here it comes again. It is no devil, I assure you, or if it be, it has put on robes of an angel of light. I think I must admit so fair a guest when it asks entrance to my heart.
Distrust it, sir. It is not a true angel.
Once more, how do you know? By what instinct do you pretend to distinguish between a fallen seraph of the abyss and a messenger from the eternal throne, between a guide and a seducer?
I judged by your countenance, sir, which was troubled when you said the suggestion had returned upon you. I feel sure it will work you more misery if you listen to it.
Not at all. It bears the most gracious message in the world. For the rest, you are not my conscience keeper. So don't make yourself uneasy. Here, come in, bonny wanderer.
This he spoke to a vision, viewless to any eye but his own. Then, folding his arms, which he had half extended on his chest, he seemed to enclose in their embrace the invisible being.
Now,
He continued again, addressing me.
I have received the pilgrim, a disguised deity, as I verily believe. Already it has done me good. My heart was a sort of channel. It will now be a shrine.
To speak truth, sir, I don't understand you at all. I cannot keep up with the conversation because it has got out of my depth. Only one thing I know. You said you were not as good as you should like to be, and that you regretted your own imperfection. One thing I can comprehend, you intimated that to have a sullied memory was a perpetual bane. It seems to me that if you tried hard, you would in time find it possible to become what you yourself would approve. And that if from this day you began with resolution to correct your thoughts and actions, you would in a few years have laid up a new and stainless store of recollections to which you might revert with pleasure.
Justly thought, rightly said, Miss Eyre. And at this moment, I am paving hell with energy.
Sir?
I am laying down good intentions, which I believe durable as flint. Certainly my associates and pursuits shall be other than they have been.
And better?
And better. So much better as pure ore is than foul dross. You seem to doubt me. I don't doubt myself. I know what my aim is, what my motives are. And at this moment I pass a law, unalterable as that of the Medes and Persians, that both are right.
They cannot be, sir, if they require a new statute to legalize them.
They are, Miss Eyre, though they absolutely require a new statute. Unheard of combinations of circumstances demand unheard of rules.
That sounds a dangerous maxim, sir, because one can see at once that it is liable to abuse.
Sententious sage, so it is. But I swear by my household gods not to abuse it.
You are human and fallible.
I am. So are you. What then?
The human and fallible should not arrogate a power with which the divine and perfect alone can be safely entrusted.
What power?
That of saying of any strange, unsanctioned line of action, let it be right.
Let it be right. The very words you have pronounced them.
May it be right then.
Said as I rose, deeming it useless to continue this discourse, which was all darkness to me, and besides sensible that the character of my interlocutor was beyond my penetration, at least beyond its present reach, and feeling the uncertainty, the vague sense of insecurity which accompanies a conviction of ignorance.
Where are you going?
To put Adele to bed. It is past her bedtime.
You're afraid of me because I talk like a sphinx.
Your language is enigmatical, sir, but though I am bewildered, I am certainly not afraid.
You are afraid. Your self-love dreads a blunder.
In that sense, I do feel apprehensive. I have no wish to talk nonsense.
If you did, it would be in such a grave, quiet manner, I should mistake it for sense. Do you never laugh, Miss Eyre? Don't trouble yourself to answer. I see you laugh rarely, but you can laugh very merrily. Believe me, you are not naturally austere any more than I am naturally vicious. The lowered constraint still clings to you somewhat, controlling your features, muffling your voice, and restricting your limbs, and you fear, in the presence of a man and a brother or father or master or what you will, to smile too gaily, speak too freely, or move too quickly. But in time, I think you will learn to be natural with me, as I find it impossible to be conventional with you. And then your looks and movements will have more vivacity and variety than they dare offer now. I see at intervals the glance of a curious sort of bird through the close-set bars of a cage. A vivid, restless, resolute captive is there. Were it but free, it would soar cloud high. You are still bent on going.
It has struck 9, sir.
Never mind. Wait a minute. Adele is not ready to go to bed yet. My position, Miss Eyre, with my back to the fire and my face to the room, favors observation. While talking to you, I have also occasionally watched Adele. I have my own reasons for thinking her a curious study, reasons that I shall impart to you someday. She pulled out of her box about 10 minutes ago a little pink silk frock. Rapture lit her face as she unfolded it. Coquetry runs in her blood, blends with her brains, and seasons the marrow of her bones. Il faut que je laisse, cried she. Et à l'instant même. And she rushed out of the room. She's now with Sophie, undergoing a robing process. In a few minutes, she will re-enter, and I know what I shall see. A miniature of Céline Varens, as she used to appear on the boards, the rising, but never mind that. However, my tenderest feelings are about to receive a shock. Such is my presentiment. Stay now to see whether it will be realized.
Ere long, Adele's little foot was heard tripping across the hall. She entered, transformed as her guardian had predicted. A dress of rose-colored satin, very short, and as full in the skirt as it could have been gathered, replaced the brown frock she had previously worn. A wreath of rosebuds circled her forehead. Her feet were dressed in silk stockings and small white satin sandals.
Est-ce que ma robe va bien?
Cried she, bounding forward.
Et mes souliers, et mes bas. Tenez, je crois que je vais danser.
And spreading out her dress, she chassed across the room till, having reached Mr. Rochester, she wheeled lightly around before him on tiptoe, dropped on one knee at his feet, exclaiming,
Monsieur, je vous remercie 1000 fois de votre bonté. C'est comme cela que maman faisait. N'est-ce pas, monsieur?
Precisely.
was the answer.
And comme cela, she charmed my English gold out of my British breeches pocket. I have been green too, Miss Eyre. Aye, grass green. Not a more vernal tint freshens you now than once freshened me. My spring is gone, however, but it has left me with that French floweret on my hands, which in some moods I would fain be rid of, not valuing now the root whence it sprang, having found that it was a sort which nothing but gold dust could manure. I have but half a liking to the bosom, especially when it looks so artificial as just now. I keep it and rear it, rather on the Roman Catholic principle of expiating numerous sins, great or small, by one good work. I'll explain all this someday. Good night.
Mr. Rochester did, on a future occasion, explain it. It was one afternoon when he chanced to meet me and Adele in the grounds while she was playing with Pilot and her shuttlecock. He asked me to walk up and down the long beach avenue within sight of her. Then he said that she was the daughter of a French opera dancer, Silène Barin, toward whom he had once cherished what he called a
grande passion.
This passion Celine had professed to return with even superior ardor. He thought himself her idol, ugly as he was, and he believed, as he said, she preferred his
taille d'athlète
to the elegance of the Apollo Belvedere.
And Miss Eyre, so much was I flattered by this preference of a Gaelic sylph for her British gnome, that I installed her in a hotel, gave her a complete establishment of servants, a carriage, cashmeres, diamonds, dentelles, etc. In short, I began the process of ruining myself in the received style like any other spoony. I had not, it seems, the originality to chalk out a new road to shame and destruction, but trod the old track with stupid exactness, not to deviate an inch from the beaten center. I had, as I deserved to have, the fate of all other spoonies. Happening to call one evening when Selene did not expect me, I found her out. But it was a warm night. I was tired with strolling through Paris, so I sat down in her boudoir, happy to breathe the air consecrated so lately by her presence. No, I exaggerate. I never thought there was any consecrating virtue about her. It was rather a sort of pastille perfume she had left, a scent of musk and amber, and then an odor of sanctity. I was just beginning to stifle with the fumes of conservatory flowers and sprinkled essences when I bethought myself to open the window and step out onto the balcony. It was moonlight and gaslight besides, and very still and serene. The balcony was furnished with a chair or two, and I sat down and took out a cigar. I will take one now, if you will excuse me.
Ensued a pause, filled by the producing and the lighting of a cigar. Having placed it to his lips, he breathed a trail of Havana incense on the freezing, sunless air. He went on.
I liked bonbons, too, in those days, Miss Eyre, and I was croquant. Overlook the barbarism. Croquant, chocolate confit, and smoking alternately, watching meantime the equipage that rolled along the fashionable streets toward the neighboring opera house, when in an elegant closed carriage drawn by a beautiful pair of English horses and distinctly seen in the brilliant city night, I recognized the voiture I had given Selene. She was returning, of course. My heart thumped with impatience against the iron rails I leant upon. The carriage stopped, as I had expected, at the hotel door. My flame, that is the very word for an opera inamorata, alighted, though muffled in a cloak, and unnecessary encumbrance, by the by, on so warm a June evening. I knew her instantly by her little foot, seen peeping from the skirt of her dress as she stepped from the carriage step. Bending over the balcony, I was about to murmur, "Mon ange," in a tone, of course, which should be audible to the ear of love alone, when a figure jumped from the carriage after her, cloaked also. But that was a spurred heel which had rung on the pavement, and that was a hatted head which now passed under the arched porte-cochere of the hotel. You never felt jealousy, did you, Miss Eyre? Of course not. I need not ask you, because you never felt love. You have both sentiments yet to experience. Your soul sleeps. The shock is yet to be given which shall waken it. You think all existence lapses in as quiet a flow as that in which your youth has hitherto slid away. Floating on with closed eyes and muffled ears, you neither see the rocks bristling not far off the bed of the flood, nor hear the breakers boil at their base. But I tell you, you may mark my words, you will come someday to a craggy pass in the channel, where the whole of life's stream will be broken up into a whirl and tumult, foam and noise. Either you will be dashed to atoms on the crag points, or lifted up and borne on by some master wave into a calmer current, as I am now. I like this day. I like that sky of steel. I like the sternness and stillness of the world under this frost. I like Thornfield, its antiquity, its retirement, its old crow trees and thorn trees, its gray facade and lines of dark windows reflecting that metal welkin. And yet how long have I abhorred the very thought of it, shunned it like a great plague house? How I do still abhor.
Ground his teeth and was silent. He arrested his step and struck his boot against the hard ground. Some hated thought seemed to have him in his grip, to hold him so tightly he could not advance. We were ascending the avenue when he thus paused. The hall was before us. Lifting his eye to its battlement, he cast over them a glance such as I never saw before or since. Pain, shame, ire, impatience, disgust, detestation seemed momentarily to hold a quivering conflict in the large pupil dilating under his ebon eyebrow. Wild was the wrestling which should be paramount, but another feeling rose in triumph, something hard and cynical, self-willed and resolute. It settled his passion and petrified his countenance. He went on.
During the moment I was silent, Miss Eyre, I was arranging a point with my destiny. She stood there, by that beech trunk, a hag like one of those who appeared to Macbeth on the heath of Forres. You like Thornfield, she said, lifting her finger, and then she wrote in the air a memento, which ran in lurid hieroglyphs all along the house front between the upper and lower row of windows. Like it if you can, like it if you dare. I will like it, said I. I dare like it. And
subjoined moodily,
I will keep my word. I will break obstacles to happiness, to goodness. Yes, goodness. I wish to be a better man than I have been, than I am. As Job's Leviathan broke the spear, the dart, and the habergeon, hindrances which others count as iron and brass, I will esteem but straw and rotten wood.
Adele ran here before us with her shuttlecock.
Away!
He cried harshly.
Keep at a distance, child, or go into Sophie!
Continuing then to pursue his walk in silence, I ventured to recall him to the point whence he had abruptly diverged.
Did you leave the balcony, sir, when Mademoiselle Varennes entered?
I unsuspected or rebuff for this hardly well-timed question, but on the contrary, walking of his scowling abstraction, he turned his eyes towards me, and the shade seemed to clear off his brow.
Oh, I'd forgotten, Selene. Well, to resume, when I saw my charmer thus come in accompanied by a cavalier, I seemed to hear a hiss, and the green snake of jealousy rising on, undulating coils from the moonlit balcony, glided within my waistcoat. She ate its way in 2 minutes to my heart's core. Strange.
Exclaimed suddenly, starting again from the point.
Strange that I should choose you for the confidant of all this, young lady. Passing strange that you should listen to me quietly, as if it were the most usual thing in the world for a man like me to tell stories of his opera mistresses to a quaint, inexperienced girl like you. But the last singularity explains the first. As I intimated once before, you, with your gravity, considerateness, and caution, were made to be the recipient of secrets. Besides, I know what sort of a mind I have placed in communication with my own. I know it is not I know it is one not liable to take infection. It is a peculiar mind. It is a unique one. Happily, I do not mean to harm it, but if I did, it would not take harm from me. The more you and I converse, the better, for while I cannot blight you, you may refresh me.
After this discretion, he proceeded.
I remained in the balcony. They will come to her boudoir, no doubt, thought I. Let me prepare an ambush. So, putting my hand in through the open window, I drew the curtain over it, leaving only an opening through which I could take observations. Then I closed the casement, all but a chink just wide enough to furnish an outlet to lovers' whispered vows. Then I stole back to my chair, and as I resumed it, the pair came in. My eye was quickly at the aperture. Celine's chambermaid entered, lit a lamp, left it on the table, and withdrew. The couple were thus revealed to me clearly. Both removed their cloaks, and there was de Varennes, shining in satin and jewels. My gifts, of course. And there was her companion in an officer's uniform. And I knew him for a young roué of a vicomte, a brainless and vicious youth whom I had sometimes met in society and had never thought of hating because I despised him so absolutely. On recognizing him, the fang of the snake jealousy was instantly broken, because at the same moment my love for Celine sank under an extinguisher. A woman who could betray me for such a rival was not worth contending for. She was only scorn. She deserved only scorn. Less, however, than I, who had been her dupe. They began to talk. Their conversation eased me completely. Frivolous, mercenary, heartless, and senseless. It was rather calculated to weary than enrage a listener. A card of mine lay on the table. This being perceived, brought my name under discussion. Neither of them possessed energy or wit to belabor me soundly, but they insulted me as coarsely as they could in their little way, especially Celine, who even waxed rather brilliant on my personal defects. Deformities, she termed them. Now it had been her custom to launch out into a fervent admiration of what she called my beauté mâle, wherein she differed diametrically from you, who told me point blank, second interview, that you did not think me handsome. Contrast struck me at the time, and
Adele came running up.
Monsieur, John has been to say that your agent has called and wishes to see you.
well, in that case, I must abridge. Opening the window, I walked in upon them, liberated Celine from my protection, gave her notice to vacate the hotel, offered her a purse for immediate exigencies, disregarded screams, hysterics, prayers, protestations, convulsions, made an appointment with the Vicomte for a meeting in the Bois de Boulogne. Next morning, I had the pleasure of encountering him. Left a bullet in one of his poor, mutilated arms, feeble as the wing of a chicken in the pip, and then I thought I had done with the whole crew. But unluckily, the Varennes, 6 months before, had given me this fillette, Adele, who, she affirmed, was my daughter, and perhaps she may be, though I see no proofs of such grim paternity written in her countenance. Pilate is more like me than she. Some years after, I had broken with the mother. She abandoned her child and ran away to Italy with a musician or singer. I acknowledged no natural claim on Adele's part to be supported by me, nor do I now acknowledge any, for I am not her father. But hearing that she was quite destitute, I took her, poor thing, out of the slime and mud of Paris and transplanted it here to grow up clean in the wholesome soil of an English country garden. Mrs. Fairfax found you to train it, but now you know that it is the illegitimate offspring of a French opera girl. You will perhaps think differently of your post and protege. You will be coming to me someday with notice that you have found another place, that you beg me to look out for a new governess, etc. Eh?
No. Adele is not answerable for either her mother's faults or yours. I have a regard for her, And now that I know that she is, in a sense, parentless, forsaken by her mother and disowned by you, sir, I shall cling closer to her than before. How could I possibly prefer the spoilt pet of a wealthy family who would hate her governess as a nuisance to a lonely little orphan who leans towards her as a friend?
Oh, that is the light in which you view it. Well, I must go now. And you too. It darkens.
I stayed out a few minutes longer with Adele and Pilot, ran a race with her and played a game of battledore and shuttlecock. When we went in, I had removed her bonnet and coat. I took her on my knee and kept her there for an hour, allowing her to prattle as she liked, not rebuking her, even some little freedoms and trivialities into which she was apt to stray when much noticed, which betrayed in her a superficiality of character inherited probably from her mother, hardly congenial to an English mind. Still, she had her merits, and I was disposed to appreciate all that was good in her, and to the utmost. I sought in her countenance and features a likeness to Mr. Rochester, but found none. No traits, no turn of expression announced the relationship. It was a pity. If she could have been proven to resemble him, he would have thought more of her. It was not till after I had withdrawn to my own chamber for a night that steadily reviewed the tale Mr. Rochester had told me. As he had said, there was probably nothing at all extraordinary in the substance of the narrative itself. The wealthy Englishman's passion for a French dancer and her treachery to him were everyday matters enough, no doubt, in society. But there was something decidedly strange in the paroxysm of emotion which had suddenly seized him when he was in the act of expressing the present contentment of his mood in his newly revived passion, pleasure of the old hall and its environs. I meditated, wondering on this incident, gradually quitting it as I found it for the present inexplicable. I turned to the consideration of my master's manner to myself. The confidence he had thought to fit to repose in me seemed a tribute to my discretion. I regarded and accepted it as such. His deportment now for some weeks had been more uniform toward me than at the first. I never seemed in his way. He did not take fits of chilling hauteur when we met unexpectedly. The encounter seemed welcome. He had always a word and sometimes a smile for me. When summoned by formal invitation of his presence, I was honored by the cordiality and reception that made me feel really possessed of a power to amuse him, and that these evening conferences were sought as much for his pleasure as for my benefit. I indeed talked comparatively little, but I heard him talk with relish. It was his nature to be communicative. He liked to open and to mind, unacquainted with the world glimpses of its scenes and ways. I did not mean its corrupt scene and wicked ways, but such as derived their interest from great scale on which they were acted, the strange novelty by which they were characterized. And it had a keen delight in receiving the new ideas he offered, in imagining the new pictures he portrayed, the following him in thought through the new regions he disclosed, never startled or troubled by one noxious illusion. The ease of his manner freed me from painful restraint. The friendly frankness, as correct and cordial, which he treated me, drew me to him. I felt at times as if he were my relation rather than my master, yet he was imperious sometimes still and did not mind that. I saw it was his way. So happy, so gratified did I become with this new interest and added to life that I ceased to pine after kindred. My thin crescent destiny seemed to have enlarged. The blanks of existence were filled up, my bodily health improved, I gathered flesh and strength. And was Mr. Rochester now ugly in my eyes? No, reader. Gratitude and many associations, all pleasurable and genial, made his face the object I best liked to see. His presence in a room was more cheering than the brightest fire. Yet I had not forgotten his faults. Indeed, I could not, for he brought them frequently for me. He was proud, sardonic, harsh to inferiority, every description. In my secret soul, I knew that his great kindness to me was balanced by unjust severity to many others. He was moody too, unaccountably so. I, more than others, when sent to read for him, found him sitting in his library alone with his head bent on folded arms, and when he looked up, a morose, almost malignant scowl blackened his features. But I believe that his moodiness, his harshness, and his former faults of morality, I say former, for now he seems corrected of them, had their source in some cruel cross of fate. I believed he was naturally a man of better tendencies, higher principles, and purer tastes in such circumstances had developed education instilled or destiny encouraged. I thought there were excellent materials in him, though for the present they hung together somewhat spoiled and tangled. I cannot deny that I grieved for his grief, whatever it was, and would have given much to assuage it. Though I had to extinguish my candle, was laid down in bed, I could not sleep for thinking of his look when he paused in the avenue and told me his destiny had risen up before him and dared him to be thanked, to be happy at Thornfield.
Why not?
I asked himself.
What alienates him from the house? Will he leave it again soon? Mrs. Fairfax said he seldom stayed here longer than a fortnight at a time, and he has now been resident 8 weeks. If he does go, the change will be doleful. Suppose he should be absent spring, summer, and autumn. How joyless sunshine and fine days will seem.
I hardly know whether I slept or not after this musing. At any rate, I started wide awake on hearing a vague murmur, peculiar and lugubrious, which sounded, I thought, just above me. I wished I'd kept my candle burning. The night was drearily dark. My spirits were depressed. I rose and sat in bed, listening. The sound was hushed. I tried again to sleep, but my heart beat anxiously. My inward tranquility was broken. The clock far down the hall struck 2. Just then it seemed my chamber door was touched, as if fingers had swept the panels in a groping way along the dark gallery outside. I said,
"Who is there?"
Nothing answered. I was chilled with fear. All at once, I remembered that it might be Pilot, who, when the kitchen door chanced to be left open, not infrequently found his way to the threshold of Mr. Rochester's chamber. I had seen him lying there myself in the mornings. The idea calmed me somewhat. I lay down. Silence composed my nerves, and as an unbroken hush now reigned through the whole house, I began to feel the return of slumber, but it was not fated that I should sleep that night. A dream had scarcely approached my ears when it fled aright, scared by a marrow-freezing incident enough. It was a demonic laugh, low, suppressed, and deep, uttered as it seemed in the very keyhole of my chamber door, the head of my bed and near my door, and I thought at first of a goblin laugh that stood by my bedside, or rather crouching by my pillow, but I rose, looked around, and could see nothing. While I still gazed in the unnatural sound as it reiterated, I knew it came from behind the panels. My first impulse was to rise and fasten the bolt. My next was to cry out,
"Who is there?"
Something gurgled and moaned. Ere long, steps retreated up the gallery towards the 3rd-story staircase. A door had lately been made to shut in the staircase. I heard it open and close, and then all was still.
Was that Grace Poole? And is she possessed by the devil?
Thought I, impossible now to remain longer by myself. I must go to Mrs. Fairfax. I hurried on my frock and shawl and withdrew the bolt and opened the door with trembling hand. There was a candle burning outside on the mantel in the gallery. I was surprised at this circumstance, but still more I was amazed to perceive that the air quite dim and filled with smoke, and while looking to the right hand and left from whence these blue wreaths issues, I became further aware of a strong smell of burning. Something creaked. It was a door ajar, and that door was Mr. Rochester's. And smoke rushed from the clouds and from hence, and I thought no more of Mrs. Fairfax. I thought no more of Grace Poole or laugh. In an instant, I was within the chambers. Tongues of flame darted around the bed. The curtains were on fire, and in the midst of the vapor, Mr. Rochester lay stretched motionless in a deep sleep.
Wake! Wake!
I shook him, but he only murmured with the smoke. The smoke stupefied him. Not a moment I could be lost, for suddenly the sheets were kindling. I rushed to the basin, and Hugh, fortunately, one wide, the other deep, both filled with water. I heaved them to deluge the bed. Its occupant flew back out to my room and brought its own water jug, baptizing the crouse fresh, and by God's aid succeeded in extinguishing the flames that were devouring it. The hiss of quenched elements, breakage of the pitcher which I flung by my hand, which I emptied it, and above all the splash of shower bath had liberatedly bestowed, roused Mr. Rochester at last. Through the now dark, I knew he was awake because I heard the fuming, strange amenities of finding himself lying in a pool of water.
Is there a flood?
No, sir, but there has been a fire. Get up, do. You are quenched now. I will fetch you a candle.
In the name of all the elves in Christendom, is that Jane Eyre? What have you done with me, witch, sorceress? Who is in the room besides you? Have you plotted to drown me?
I will fetch you a candle, sir, and in heaven's name, get up. Somebody has plotted something. You cannot too soon find out who and what it is.
There, I'm up now. But at your peril, you fetch a candle yet? Wait 2 minutes till I get some dry garments, if any dry there be. Yes, here is my dressing gown. Now run!
I did run. I brought the candle, which still remained in the gallery. I took it from my hand, held it up, and surveyed the bed, all blackened and scorched, and the sheets drenched, and the carpet around swimming with water.
What is it? And who did it?
I briefly related to him, but it transpired the strange laugh I had heard in the gallery, the step ascending to the third story, the smoke, the smell of fire, and conducted me to this room, and in what state I found matters there, and how I had deluged him with water, with all the water that I could lay my hands on. He listened very gravely. His face, as I went on, expressed more concern than astonishment. He did not immediately speak when I had concluded.
Shall I call Mrs. Fairfax?
Mrs. Fairfax? No. What the deuce would you call her for? What can she do? Let her sleep unmolested.
Then I will fetch Leia and wake John and his wife.
Not at all. Just be still. You have a shawl on. If you are not warm enough, you may take my cloak yonder, wrap it around you, and sit down in the armchair. There. I will put it on. Now place your feet on the stool to keep them out of the wet. I'm going to leave you for a few minutes. I shall take the candle. Remain where you are till I return. Be as still as a mouse. I must pay a visit to the second story. Don't move, remember, or call anyone.
He went. I watched the light withdraw. He passed up the gallery very softly, unclosed the staircase door with as little noise as possible, shut it after him, and the last ray vanished. I was left in total darkness. I listened for some noise, but heard nothing. A very long time elapsed. I grew weary. It was cold in spite of the cloak, and then I did not see the use of staying, as I was not to rouse the house. I was on the point of risking Mr. Rochester's displeasure by disobeying his orders, when the light once more gleamed dimly on the gallery wall, and I heard his unshod feet tread the matting.
I hope it is he,
Thought I.
not something worse.
He re-entered pale and very gloomy.
I have found it all out.
He said, setting the kettle down on the washstand.
It is as I thought.
How, sir?
He made no reply, but stood with his arms folded, looking on the ground. At the end of a few minutes, he inquired in a rather peculiar tone.
I forget whether you said you saw anything when you opened your chamber door.
No, sir, only the candlestick on the ground.
But you heard an odd laugh. You've heard that laugh before, I should think, or something like it.
Yes, sir. There is a woman who sews here called Grace Poole. She laughs in that way. She is a singular person.
Just so, Grace Poole. You have guessed it. She is, as you say, singular, very. Well, I shall reflect on the subject. Meantime, I am glad that you are the only person besides myself acquainted with the precise details of tonight's incident. You are no talking fool. Say nothing about it. I will account for this state of affairs.
Pointing to the bed.
And now return to your own room. I shall do very well on the sofa in my library for the rest of the night. It is near 4. In 2 hours, the servants will be up.
Good night then, sir.
I said, departing. He seemed surprised, very inconsistently, so as he has just told me to go.
What? Are you quitting me already? And in that way?
You said I might go, sir.
But not without taking leave, not without a word or two of acknowledgement and goodwill, not, in short, in that brief, dry fashion. Why, you have saved my life, snatched me from a horrible and excruciating death, and you walk past me as if we were mutual strangers? At least shake hands.
He held out his hand. I gave him mine. He took it first in one, then in both of his own.
You have saved my life. I have a pleasure in owing you so immense a debt. I cannot say more. Nothing else that has being would have been tolerable to me in the character of creditor for such an obligation. But you, it is different. I feel your benefits, nor no burden, Jane.
Paused, gazed at me. Words almost visible trembled on his lips, but his voice was checked.
Good night again, sir. There is no debt, benefit, burden, obligation in the case.
I knew you would do me good in some way, at some time. I saw it in your eyes when I first beheld you. Their expression and smile did not strike delight to my very inmost heart, so for nothing. People talk of natural sympathies. I have heard of good genii. There are grains of truth in the wildest fable. My cherished preserver. Good night.
Strange energy was in his voice, strange fire in his look.
I am glad I happened to be awake.
And then I was going.
What? You will go?
I am cold, sir.
Cold? Yes, and standing in a pool. Go then, Jane, go.
He still retained my hand and I could not free it. I bethought myself of an expedient.
I think I hear Mrs. Fairfax move, sir.
He relaxed his fingers and I was gone. I regained my comfort, never thought of sleep till morning dawned. I was tossed on the buoyant but unquiet sea where billows of trouble roll under surges of joy. I thought sometimes I was beyond its wildest waters, a shore sweet as the hills of Beulah, and now and then a freshening gale, weakened by hope, bore my spirit triumphantly towards the bourne. But I could not reach it, even in fancy, and counteracting breezes blew off land, continually drove me back. Sense would resist delirium, judgment would warn passion. Too feverish to rest, I rose as the day dawned.
And that's the end of our section. That was so good and fantastic. And I was fangirling like the whole time. Before I talk about you and let you talk, I just want to remind our audience why we're here. We are trying to raise money. We need 15 million pounds. It's not all on us though, but we do need money to help save the treasures of the Huddersfield Library. These are items that were set to go to auction. They included manuscripts, books owned by authors of the 19th century, things that we thought were lost for 100 years. They were saved from a public auction, but now the Friends of the National Libraries need 15 million pounds to preserve them and put them on public display. There are links in our older YouTube videos descriptions, such as the welcome video, that will take you to our GoFundMe page where you can donate, and also to the Friends of the National Libraries page where you could donate there as well. I am trying to update the descriptions of our current videos, so those will be up there tomorrow. We're going to return here tomorrow at 10 a.m. New York time, which is 3 p.m. London time, to start another segment of our readathon. So come back and join us then if you're watching us live, or just continue to the next video if you are watching us after we've finished this readathon. Thank you, performers. That was so great. Do any of you want to share any like big feelings that you might have about this? Any thoughts or observations that you might have had?
Oh, it's hard.
I want to say what a pleasure it was listening to everybody. I'm not a thespian, I'm a writer, but the rest of you, wow, you really brought your characters to life. It was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
This was, and I do want to remind everyone who's watching too, that these are not people who know one another. Emilio and Katrina met like 5 minutes before we went live, and you two did a fantastic job. The Jane Rochester dialogue relationship is so difficult to pull off in all the scenes, and especially in this series of chapters. It was really good. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think so I read this book, in my early schooling days, and it's been a long time since I've revisited it. And it's kind of fascinating that it is set up as this, it's known as one of these iconic romantic novels, and yet, we meet them and Rochester's falling off a horse, and, there's descriptions of not being the most attractive. And I think it's so kind of delightful and inspiring that we can celebrate this epic journey in love and battle of wits in these characters who you might write off as plain or ordinary, or I thought that was a cool discovery in rereading it now.
And Emilio, you hadn't read this before, you said earlier, so how did you feel about meeting Rochester and getting to be him right now?
I really enjoy the challenging, like what a challenging man. I see so many problems in who he is and what he's gone through. But I think one of the things that I really enjoy about courtship of this era, and then obviously clearly captured in this piece, is the low and slow burn. And so things don't have to be grand. They can just be ordinary, I think is what Katrina was saying. And there seems to be a focus in their language on their defaults, their defects, their faults, and a humbling approach, rather than like, I'm going to try to prove to you I'm this great thing. No, right off the bat, it's like, I'm this awful thing, and let me tell you stories about it and why I am. It's fascinating. I'm interested to see where they go from here, because I know there's a lot more to go.
And this is such a great start too, because a lot of the imagery and actions and dialogue that are associated with Rochester and Jane in this kind of meet cute section is going to come back in different circumstances tomorrow at 10, and at 1 o'clock, we're going to see the kind of parting that they do that's going to come up again. A lot of the same conversations, talking about the same things, returning to the fairy imagery. But Charlotte Bronte does such a fantastic job altering it just a bit that it becomes something different when we see it revisited again with Jane and Rochester. Something that I love too about their dynamic, and also your dynamic as actors, is one of my friends asked me who hadn't read the novel before, but who was reading as part of this, asked me, well, what is Jane and Rochester's relationship like? And I said, well, it's kind of like Beatrice and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing, or it's kind of like Kate and Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew. And then as you were reading this, I was thinking, well, they're talking about getting stung, which that is from The Taming of the Shrew. There's the emphasis that Rochester has on strange. He said strange like 3 times in the same paragraph, which is from Benedict, like, is that not strange? We see echoes of Hamlet with doubt, his poem to Ophelia, doubt thou, the sun is, I forgot the line now, whether I have to say it, but doubt, never doubt I love is the final line of his poem. And then the reference to the Scottish play with the hag. We do see a lot of Shakespeare here. And so it was so much fun to hear it coming out of the mouths of experienced Shakespeare actors. And Christina, you were such a trooper. This was so many words. This is my clap. That was so fantastic. Thank you for hanging in there. And how do you feel after saying so much of Jane?
Well, I mean, it was hard. It was great. But I had never read it as an adult either. And I had seen, obviously, we've all seen many film versions, whatever. But reading it as an adult, this girl is funny, and I have never seen the humor of her played. I don't think ever on the screen. I'm and I, from Joan Fontaine to whoever. I mean, from the newest that she's, I mean, she's various things, but I just never. But she's the stuff that was just out and out. She has a sense of humor, which
It's so true. And our Jane narrator in the last segment too said the same thing. And part of it is the repartee that she has with the reader. She talks to the reader. There's a very famous line that I'm not going to say now that's at the end of the novel that she addresses the reader as she begins a new chapter, the final chapter. And it's not something we see in a lot of modern literature, this narrator, speaker, character who also interacts with the audience in that way. And it does add a lot of humor, and it's great. This was so great, everyone. Anything else? Any final words you want to add?
Thank you for letting us do that.
I want to add something. In my research for the biography I wrote, I read a lot about each one of the sisters, and the Bronte sisters were all strongly influenced in their writing by their personal experiences. And when Charlotte was at the clergyman's school, which she modeled Lowood School after the clergyman's school, she had, you would hear noises in the attic, and Charlotte would tell spooky stories to all of the girls. And it was a big dormitory with about 10 to 12 beds in it. And she would tell spooky stories about the woman in the attic. And it's so interesting years later when she writes Jane Eyre to find the woman in the attic. So if you haven't read Jane Eyre, please continue to do so. It's considered the first feminist novel. And it's something that, even though its writing style is now considered a little esoteric, the principles in it are timeless.
Well, she out and out says, I was reading these lines going, oh my God, she's saying women feel exactly the same things as men. Women need exactly the same things as men. I'm going,
And yet Charlotte wrote it not with her own name. It was published under Currer Bell. She had to hide behind a male sounding persona. And when we read her preface earlier to the second edition, it's very obvious that it's assumed that the author was a male, which is disappointing. But you're right, it's so good. And we relate to it so well after 150 years. And there are so many echoes of the Bronte's childhood, references to genii from their juvenilia, which make me happy every time those come up, and fairies. So this was so fantastic. Final chance for any last words. I made that sound worse. Any final words for this discussion that someone would like to add?
I'll be back tomorrow.
I hope everyone will give generously, because it's so wonderful to think that the Bronte document will return to Haworth and will be housed in the Bronte Parsonage Museum. That's a worthy endeavor.
And something that one of my friends said is that these original manuscripts, like Emily's small book of poetry, these are like Horcruxes, to borrow something from Harry Potter. These are the things that authors put part of their soul into, and they really do belong back in Haworth, in the parsonage, in the home where they were created. And our donations and our efforts to spread the word about saving the Honresfield Library, the Friends of the National Library's efforts to raise 15 million pounds will make all of the difference in righting the wrongs of what has happened in the last 100 years with this tragic separation of these documents from their rightful homes. So thank you so much, everyone. I will see some of you again later with this readathon. I hope to see more of the audience, I hope you join us. I can't actually see you. But I hope you come back and find out what happens to Jane in Rochester, see if anyone dies. Maybe there's tragedy, maybe there's joy. Who knows? Come back and find out what happens. And even if you've read this many times before, I promise there will be surprises. We have a surprise that's not in the novel that is going to be tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I'm so excited for it. Christina's coming back tomorrow and she doesn't even know what's going to happen there. I haven't told her yet, but it's going to be great. So thank you so much, readers. I actually don't know how to just stop the live streaming without totally turning off the meeting. So I'm going to end the meeting. If you want to come back into the Zoom room and say hi or bye or talk to each other, I'll reopen a different one for us. But thank you, everyone, for your participation. I will see you tomorrow.